Hey guys, tonight we journey far beyond the pages of history into a time when stories were carved in stone, not scribbled in ink. You're walking through fog that smells of dust and memory, your footsteps echoing in some forgotten chamber that hums with secrets. And let me warn you, you probably won't survive this. At least, not with your version of reality intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let's see how far this ancient mystery reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin at the end of the world as we know it, before the pyramids, before Mesopotamia, before even the idea of time was invented. It's not the dawn of civilization, it's what came before civilization dared to open its eyes. Picture a vast plain, perhaps in the Middle East, perhaps beneath the sea, perhaps under your own feet. What you see isn't sand or ruins or old pottery. It's weight, enormous stone weight. And it's whispering. This is the moment where you start to wonder, what if the greatest structures ever built weren't recorded in history? Because they came long before history. Somewhere out there, buried under desert jungle ice, or even the sea, are structures that don't belong. They're too big, too precise, too impossible. They don't fit our timeline. So instead of rewriting history to include them, we shove them off the page. Like the drunk uncle at Thanksgiving, they're too inconvenient to invite, but they never stop showing up. The stones are massive. Some weigh hundreds, even thousands of tons. That's not the kind of thing you quietly misplace. Yet entire cities made of these stones have no records, no blueprints, no construction sites, no names attached. Just the structures, just the impossibility. Some of them sit in full view, like the massive trilithon stones of Baalbek in Lebanon, so large that modern cranes can barely nudge them. Others lie hidden beneath the sea, like the Yonaguni Monument, where divers swim along steps and angles that mimic man-made temples. Unless geology suddenly got really creative. You'll hear mainstream archaeology say, people were just really motivated. They had time. They had ropes. Sure, maybe they also had anti-gravity forklifts and laser levels made of unicorn tears. Because dragging a 900-ton stone uphill using logs sounds a bit like trying to lift a skyscraper with a spoon. Still, what if those stones were never meant to impress us with scale but with memory? What if they're bookmarks, intentional? Giant bookmarks left by someone or something that wanted to be remembered when the dust finally settled. And maybe, just maybe that's the trick. The flood came, the fire, the forgetting. But the stone stayed. It always does. And the stones, they don't lie. They wait. They whisper. Tonight, you'll walk through temples, tombs, sunken cities, and mountain fortresses. You'll touch walls that don't shake in earthquake stares, too deep for human stride chambers that echo even when you whisper. And through it all, one feeling remains. We missed something. Something important. Something enormous. But you're not alone. Across the globe, cultures some that never met carved and cut and stacked and measured in ways that defy our understanding. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. One that says, you weren't the first. So let's begin where the ground itself trembles, not from earthquakes, but from the presence of something that was never supposed to survive. A place where 3 stones alone weigh more than an aircraft carrier perched impossibly on a hill, watching the millennia pass. Baalbek, Lebanon. You're going to want to sit down for this one. You're standing in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, where the air feels too still, as if even the wind is holding its breath. The sun paints the cracked stone in gold, and the ruins stretch out before you quiet, imposing almost like they're pretending to be normal ruins. But they're not. Welcome to Baalbek. At first glance, you might think you've wandered into a Roman temple complex. You'd be partly right. Roman columns and arches still jut proudly into the sky, worn by time but stubbornly upright. Yet the real story lies beneath them, literally. Because what supports this ancient wonder isn't Roman. It's something else entirely. Something that doesn't fit. As you stroll toward the Temple of Jupiter, your eye catches them 3 massive blocks fitted into a retaining wall resting in the 6th course of stone, not even at ground level. Each of them weighs over 700 tons. That's right, tons. The kind of weight that makes skyscrapers nervous. They're called the trilithon stones, and they don't just sit there, they're locked in with such perfect precision that not even a whisper of air passes through the seams. No mortar, no glue. Just friction gravity and some ancient arrogance. Imagine trying to build a Lego set, but each brick weighs more than a fully loaded 747. And then you stack them, smoothly, flawlessly. In a time when, according to history books, the wheel was still a luxury, and iron tools were barely a twinkle in the metallurgist's eye. And then, you look uphill toward a nearby quarry, and you spot something even more ridiculous, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons, still attached to the earth, still waiting, abandoned mid-move. Like someone said, that one's too much, even for us. Mainstream archaeologists will tell you the Romans built the Temple of Jupiter, and sure, they absolutely did. Their stonework is visible. Their inscriptions present their columns proud. But those same Romans, the masters of roads and aqueducts, never worked with stones this size anywhere else. Not in Rome, not in Carthage, not in Alexandria. So why here? Why 3 megaliths so enormous that they seem intentionally showy? And more importantly, how? Let's talk logistics. Moving a 700-ton stone in modern times would require specialized hydraulic cranes, meticulously calculated pressure distribution, and millions of dollars in equipment. That's with trucks, with power tools, with concrete and diesel. But you're supposed to believe that a few guys in linen skirts dragged them with ropes and optimism. Here's the part where explanations get fuzzy. Some suggest the stones were rolled on logs. Others propose ramps and pulleys. But let's be real, those logs would have snapped like twigs. The ramps would have crushed under the pressure. And the manpower. You'd need an army, not to mention the coordination of NASA-level engineers. Still, the stones were moved. They were placed. That's not a theory, that's a visible, immovable fact. Then comes the placement issue. These aren't lying flat on the ground. The trilithon stones are 13 feet above ground level. They're not part of a base layer, they're in the middle of the structure. So not only did someone have to move them, they had to lift them, smoothly, without breaking the stone, without damaging the wall. That's not engineering, that's wizardry. So here's the fallback theory. Maybe the Romans didn't move the trilithon. Maybe they found them already in place, inherited them, built around them. After all, cultures have been repurposing ancient foundations forever. The Incas did it. The Egyptians did it. We still do it, we pave over ruins all the time. All. So what if Baalbek isn't a Roman marvel, but something far older? A relic from a forgotten age passed down like a family heirloom too heavy to throw out. And if that's the case, we need to ask who built the platform. And why? Was it ritualistic? Some say that the effort alone, the act of moving the unmovable, was a kind of sacred offering, a demonstration of devotion, a test of will. Still others whisper about lost technologies, sonic levitation, geopolymer, chemistry, or ancient forms of electromagnetism. Fringe theories. Sure. But the alternative is pretending wooden sleds did this. There's a thing that archaeologists don't like to talk about much, the chronological firewall. It's this invisible line in time where they say, before here, nothing advanced. Just hunters and gatherers and pointy sticks. But Baalbek doesn't respect that firewall. It laughs at it. Because you can't date stone directly. You can date what's on it, Roman inscriptions, pottery shards, coins. But that's like dating a basement by the wallpaper in the attic. Look closer and you'll see the disconnect. Roman architecture is elegant, yes, detailed, symmetrical, but it's also built on top of something rougher, deeper, and frankly more absurd. It's like building a charming log cabin on the deck of an aircraft carrier and pretending the whole thing is yours. Some researchers even argue that Baalbek's original purpose wasn't religious at all, but technological. That the precision and scale suggest functionality, not just ceremony. Maybe it was a launch pad, a power station, or a refuge built to survive the cataclysm we keep finding echoes of across the globe. We're not saying aliens. Okay, we're almost saying aliens. But the truth is, we don't know. Not really. And maybe that's the most honest answer anyone can give about Baalbek. But here's what we do know. The stones are real. They were cut, moved, placed, and they've endured for thousands of years, mocking our explanations with their impossible presence. And so you stand there in the shadow of something that defies gravity logic and history, wondering if the hands that built it were even human, or if they were human, just not like us. Either way, Baalbek doesn't wait for understanding. It waits to be seen. Now that your perception has been thoroughly dented by the monolithic mystery of Baalbek, it's time to climb even higher, both in altitude and absurdity. You find yourself gasping thin air as you crest the Andean Plateau, 12,800 feet above sea level. The wind here doesn't whisper. It bites. The earth is hard, barren. It resists life. And yet something decided this was the place to leave behind a message in stone. A message we've never managed to decode. Welcome to Pumapunku, Bolivia. No matter how prepared you think you are not ready for this place. You look around, and it doesn't feel ancient, it feels alien. Not because of little green men, but because of the design. It just doesn't fit any box labeled ancient human behavior. You're not staring at temples or statues or inscriptions. You're staring at stone blocks that look like they rolled off a modern assembly line. They lie scattered now like someone hit pause mid-construction or mid-demolition. Gigantic sliced slabs of andesite and red sandstone carved with such straight edges and perfect angles, they mock your measuring tools. You bend down, running your hand across one of the famous H-shaped blocks. It's smooth. Too smooth. The lines are so straight, so mathematically flawless, it's as if the stone was cut by laser, not by bronze chisels and sweat. Mainstream archaeologists credit the Tiwanaku civilization, a people who flourished here between 500 and 1000 CE, with creating this architectural fever dream. But that raises some awkward questions, like how the Tiwanaku had no writing system, no pulleys, no cranes. Their tools were mostly made of bronze, and last time you checked, bronze doesn't cut. Andesite, it bounces off it like a toddler punching a wall. So how were the stones carved? Historians suggest pecking with harder rocks. That's right, repeatedly hitting one of the hardest stones on Earth with another rock for weeks, months, years, until you've carved a block with tolerances of less than a millimeter. That's like carving an F1 engine out of steel using a spoon, and sheer optimism. It's a charming story, but it doesn't hold up. Some of these blocks have holes drilled clean through them. Same diameter, same depth. Others have parallel grooves so precise you could slide a metal square along them and hear no scrape. There are vertical cuts that go inches deep into rock perfectly straight, like they were made by a modern saw blade. And yet, no saws, no drills, just the ghost of an explanation. They pecked at it. And then there's the sheer size of the stones. The largest blocks at Pumapunku weigh over 100 tons. That's not decorative stonework, that's architectural madness. The sandstone slabs used for the foundation tip the scale at 130 tons, and they weren't quarried locally. The sandstone came from about 10 kilometers away, the andesite closer to 90 kilometers, across terrain so rough it would give a jeep a nervous breakdown. And, oh yeah, you have to cross a river too. Take a moment to picture that a group of people without wheels dragging a 130-ton stone for miles across mountains, crossing rivers, all while gasping for air at nearly 13,000 feet. No beasts of burden, no industrial equipment, just ropes and maybe divine stubbornness. Even if you grant them infinite time, how do you explain the result? Because the end product isn't sloppy, it's precise. These blocks aren't random, they're modular, like an ancient Lego set but made of stone and sculpted with mathematical intent. Some of them interlock, not just stacked joined. That means the builders didn't just think vertically. They thought structurally, architecturally like engineers, and the arrangement wasn't random either. Puma Punku once had platforms, doorways, steps, and corridors all connected like a 3D puzzle. Many of the blocks were designed to fit in a larger whole. This wasn't experimentation. This was execution with vision. But now it's all shattered. The site today looks like it was hit by a bomb. Stones are overturned, flung meters from their original positions. Some are cracked, broken, even flipped upside down. This doesn't look like erosion or decay. It looks like violence. Like something ripped the place apart in a moment. A cataclysm. Some suggest an earthquake. Others whisper comet impact. There's a growing theory that around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Earth experienced a sudden and devastating event. Glaciers melted, sea levels rose, and whatever civilization was building places like Puma Punku may have been wiped out overnight. And if that timeline sounds familiar, it should. It lines up eerily with flood myths from Sumer Egypt and even the Bible, Plato's Atlantis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Noah. Different cultures, same whispered memory. Something big happened, and fast. But what makes Puma Punku so terrifying isn't just its scale or its perfection. It's that no one can date it properly. You can carbon date wood or bone near it, but you can't date stone. So when scholars say Puma Punku is about 500 years old, what they really mean is the things we found near Puma Punku are 500 years old. The stones. They could be much, much older. Which leads to the inevitable question, what if the Tiwanaku didn't build Puma Punku? What if they inherited it, just like the Romans may have inherited Baalbek? What if they found a ruin already ancient, and simply made it theirs? This theory isn't just fringe anymore. Some archaeologists are starting to admit quietly that Puma Punku may have pre-Tiwanaku origins, that maybe, just maybe, it predates everything. So who built it? We don't know. Maybe it was a civilization, long lost one, that knew geometry, stone cutting, and astronomical alignments. Maybe it was us, thousands of years ago, before we forgot who we were. Or maybe it was someone else. But one thing is clear, you are not supposed to understand Puma Punku. That's the point. It's like a riddle wrapped in a paradox and crushed by a megalith. It resists certainty. It defies the comfort of clean narratives. And yet here it is. Stone doesn't lie. It doesn't exaggerate. It just is. So, as you run your hand along the edge of a 1,000-year-old groove, sharp enough to paper-cut pride, you're left with one haunting thought: someone built this. Someone solved these problems. And we can't even agree on how they started. And that is how you lose sleep, 800 feet above sea level, under a Bolivian sky surrounded by ruins that laugh at history textbooks and whisper softly. You forgot something. You're still catching your breath from the altitude of Puma Punku, but the mountain air isn't done with you yet. Just a few hundred kilometers away, nestled above the Peruvian city of Cusco, lies another impossibility, one that coils like a giant stone serpent along the hillside, staring down at you with an ancient, unmoving gaze. Sacsayhuaman. The name twists in your mouth like a word you were never meant to speak. Some say it means satisfied falcon. Others believe it translates more closely to head of the puma. Either way, what you're about to see will claw at your understanding of what the ancients could do. At first, it looks like a massive stone wall, zigzagging tiers of boulders so large they look like the teeth of a sleeping titan. But then, you get closer. You touch the surface, you run your fingers along the edges, and you realize something strange. These aren't bricks. They're megaliths, non-linear multi-angled blocks, some weighing more than 200 tons, all slotted together without a drop of mortar. No cement, no glue, just perfect fit. And they don't just fit, they lock. Each block is uniquely shaped to interlock with its neighbors. This isn't construction, it's sculpture on the scale of tectonic plates. You keep looking for signs of mistakes. Surely somewhere in this jigsaw of giants, someone messed up, made a joint too wide, a corner too short. But no. Every seam is tight. So tight that even after hundreds of years of earthquakes, erosion, and pillaging, most of these stones haven't moved an inch. This is no coincidence. The site was built to survive everything, and it has. Now, let's talk logistics, because that's where things get absurd again. These stones didn't come from the hillside they now occupy. They were quarried miles away and hauled across valleys, up steep inclines, and finally set in place along a sloping mountaintop. No wheels, no iron, no engines, just raw power patience and a level of architectural obsession that borders on spiritual mania. And the craziest part, the Inca, the very people mainstream history credits with building this, never actually claimed they did. The Inca built on top of it. Yes, they maintained it, they revered it. But the biggest stones, the deepest foundations, according to their own legends, those were the work of the first ones, the ancient ones, the gods, the people who came before. So even the Inca stone stacking legends in their own right looked at Sacsayhuaman and went, yeah, that wasn't us. Let that sink in. Modern engineers have tried replicating this style of construction on a smaller scale. Some have succeeded in controlled environments with laser cutters and computer simulations. But no one has attempted to rebuild Sacsayhuaman as it is. Not because we lack the tech, but because we lack the reasoning. Who moves 200-ton boulders to build a wall that can withstand earthquakes? Why not just use smaller stones, bricks, or heaven forbid mortar? The wall isn't just strong, it's flexible. The curved joints and varied angles allow it to absorb seismic energy. When earthquakes strike the region, and they often do, most modern buildings tremble, crack, crumble. But not this wall. It shifts, breathes, and then returns to stillness. Historians still argue whether this was the result of thousands of years of architectural trial and error, or inherited seismic wisdom from a civilization already lost to time. And then there's the deeper layer, the aesthetic. These aren't just blocks stacked for function. They're arranged beautifully, curved, undulating, organic. It's not architecture, it's poetry in granite. Some stones have up to 12 faces, each face precisely cut to fit the stone beside it. It's like trying to carve a puzzle piece to match 12 others already in place, and each one weighs more than a space shuttle. Get it wrong, and you don't get a redo. You only get crushed. But there's something even stranger: the curves. Many of the stones aren't flat, they're convex and concave. They bow inward and outward, like clay molded by hand. But this isn't clay. This is andesite, basalt, limestone, some of the hardest stones on Earth. You don't bend these materials, you shatter them. Unless you're using some kind of lost technique. Some researchers have proposed the liquid stone theory, a controversial idea that ancient builders somehow softened the rock, shaping it like cement before it hardened again. There's no direct evidence for this, of course, but the theory lives on because the stones themselves demand explanation. The alternative is that someone carved these curves and joins by hand, with copper chisels, over 1,000 years ago, and we're supposed to believe they just eyeballed it. Sacsayhuaman is often described as a fortress, but even that label feels lazy. Yes, it has walls. Yes, it's high up overlooking the city below. But it doesn't feel like a place designed for battle. It feels like a place designed for something bigger. The Inca aligned their temples with the stars. They believed mountains were sacred. They worshipped the sun, the moon, and the unseen energies of the earth. And Sacsayhuaman, it fits into that worldview too perfectly to ignore. Its layout resembles the head of a puma, with Cusco's city center forming the body. It sits on powerful ley lines where energies are said to converge. Some say it was an energy hub, a place of ritual and resonance, maybe even communication with the gods or the stars. And then there's the damage. The upper tiers of the structure were destroyed by the Spanish conquistadors, who used the smaller stones to build churches and cathedrals in Cusco. But the giant blocks, they couldn't move them, couldn't break them. So they left them. And those stones are still here, waiting, watching. What's left is like a skeleton, a giant fossil of an idea too massive to be buried, too bold to be forgotten. You step back and look at the wall again, and it hits you. This isn't just a structure. It's a boundary between the history we teach and the history we lost, between what we know and what we refuse to know. So, you press your hand to the cold surface of a 200-ton stone fitted with sub-millimeter precision against its neighbors, and you feel it, not just the weight, but the intention. Someone wanted this to last. Someone wanted this to outlive earthquakes, wars, religions, and empires, and it has. Sacsayhuaman doesn't explain itself. It doesn't give up secrets. It doesn't need to. It just is. And in its silent immensity, it tells you all you really need to know. We weren't the first. You leave the serpent walls of Sacsayhuaman behind, but the stones aren't done with you yet. They never are. You descend briefly from the heights of Cusco, only to rise again this time along a ridge between two forest-draped Andean peaks. Mist gathers around your ankles as you climb the air thick with eucalyptus moss and something older, something expectant. Then, like a phantom in the clouds, it appears. Machu Picchu. Even if you've seen photos, nothing prepares you for that first glimpse. It doesn't just rise from the mountaintop, it blends with it. From a distance, you could almost believe the city grew here, naturally, like stone vines clinging to the cliffs. Up close, though, you see what no photograph captures: intention, geometry, balance, secrets, and you begin to ask the same question all visitors ask eventually: why here? This isn't a convenient place to build a royal estate or a temple complex. It's a logistical nightmare. Machu Picchu clings to a razor-thin ridge thousands of feet above the Urubamba River. It's surrounded on three sides by plunging cliffs, and the weather flips from baking sun to drenching rain in the blink of an eye. This is not just high up. This is inaccessible, which makes what's here all the more staggering. Mainstream historians will tell you the site was built in the mid-15th century by the great Incan Emperor Pachacuti, that it was a royal retreat, a summer palace in the clouds. They'll say it was abandoned less than 100 years later during the Spanish conquest and forgotten until 1911, when American explorer Hiram Bingham rediscovered it under layers of jungle and time. That version isn't wrong, but it's not the full story. Because when you walk through Machu Picchu, the stones change beneath your feet. The upper levels, the walls with tidy rectangular blocks, the temples with squared corners, the terraces that cascade down like green steps. Those are classic Incan construction. Dry stone walls, polygonal masonry, slight inward slants to resist earthquakes. Impressive, yes, but replicable. Now go deeper, lower, closer to the mountain's bedrock. They're tucked under layers of more recent craftsmanship. You'll find stones that don't look like Incan work at all. They're massive, curved, seamless. The joins between them are so tight you couldn't fit a razor blade through. Some of the stones appear melted, as if they were softened and shaped, not carved. Others are so deeply embedded in the rock that you can't tell where mountain ends and architecture begins. This isn't your standard Andean stonework. This is something else. And it's not just in Machu Picchu. You saw it at Sacsayhuaman. You'll see it again at Ollantaytambo. A pattern whispers in granite that refused to align with the accepted timeline. Let's talk about what Machu Picchu doesn't have. It doesn't have fortification walls. It doesn't have clear tactical purpose. There's no evidence of military use. That suggests it wasn't built to keep enemies out, but maybe to keep something else in. Or maybe it wasn't about defense at all. Maybe it was about alignment, about harmony, about communicating with something beyond human. Because Machu Picchu isn't just a city, it's a cosmic machine. The Temple of the Sun, for instance, is built around a carved rock that aligns perfectly with the June solstice sunrise. The Intihuatana stone, called the hitching post of the sun, casts no shadow during the equinox. That's not coincidence. That's astronomical engineering. These aren't sunbathers tracking vitamin D. These were skywatchers, timekeepers, earth readers. The city's design suggests not just awareness of celestial movement, but reverence for it. Structures align with constellations, solstices, equinoxes. Every staircase, every plaza, every doorway feels placed, not just built. You walk one of the narrow paths between the agricultural terraces, still functional after 500 years, by the way, and glance to the side. There, disguised as a staircase, is a drainage channel cut into the stone to guide rainwater away from the foundations. The city has over 100 drainage channels, all carved with absurd precision. Machu Picchu averages 77 inches of rain per year. The Incas didn't just plan for it, they designed for it. And the water still flows. That's right. After 5 centuries of neglect, the hydraulic system still works. Better than the gutters on your roof. That's not just cleverness, that's engineering philosophy. One that marries the scientific with the spiritual, form with function, earth with sky. Now, step into the Temple of the Three Windows. Each trapezoidal opening frames a slice of the valley below. 3 perspectives, 3 paths, 3 worlds. Some say they represent the Andean worldview, Uku Pacha, the underworld, Kai Pacha, the physical world, and Hanan Pacha, the upper world of gods and stars. Others see them as portals, symbolic or literal, meant to draw in energy or consciousness or memory. Because that's what this place feels like, a memory. One carved into the skin of the earth. And that brings us to the rumors. Because no ancient site is complete without them. There are stories of tunnels beneath Machu Picchu chambers yet to be excavated. Entrances sealed or forgotten. In 2010, researchers using ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be voids beneath the Temple of the Sun. The Peruvian government declined to excavate. Out of respect, they said. Others whisper of metallic sounds echoing from beneath the mountain, of energy fields that confuse compasses, of ghost lights dancing across the terraces during equinoxes, of vibrations that affect dreams. Sound woo-woo. Sure. But then you look around and remember, none of this should be here. The mountain is too steep, the rocks too massive, the weather too volatile. And yet, every stone fits, every wall breathes, every view feels curated, not just for beauty, but for meaning. Some researchers suggest Machu Picchu sits on a ley line, a path of geomagnetic energy that ancient civilizations supposedly knew how to detect and use. It's a theory often laughed out of academic rooms, but it never really goes away. Because Machu Picchu doesn't feel random. It feels tuned. And maybe that's the key. Maybe this city wasn't just built. Maybe it was placed. Not for defense, not for convenience, but for resonance. To harmonize with the planet. To align with something larger than human ambition. So who built it? The Incas, yes. But maybe not all of it. Maybe they built on top of something older. Maybe they inherited more than the stones. Maybe they inherited memory. And you standing there now surrounded by clouds and silence are starting to hear it too. That hum beneath the mountain, that echo in the stones, that whisper that's been with you since Baalbek, since Pumapunku, since the first time you realized history doesn't just have gaps, it has chasms. And maybe, just maybe, Machu Picchu wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be felt. By now, the mountain has its hooks in you. Machu Picchu didn't let go, it just handed you off to the next puzzle in the chain. Down the sacred valley, deeper into Peru, where mist hugs the cliffs and the sound of rushing water drowns out modern thoughts, you arrive at a place that looks like a fortress, until it doesn't. This is Ollantaytambo. If Machu Picchu is a dream floating in the sky, Ollantaytambo is the hard-edged rebuttal. It doesn't whisper, it challenges you. The terraces climb the mountain in enormous sweeping steps, and at first glance you might think you've seen it all before. Classic Incan terracing, well-aligned walls, ceremonial fountains, intricate irrigation systems. But then your eyes drift to the Sun Temple, and suddenly the questions hit like a landslide. At the top of this already impossible site sits a wall that breaks the rules. The stones are pink granite, a material not native to this exact spot. They shimmer faintly in sunlight, and they're not small. Some weigh 50 to 60 tons each. Smoothly carved, carefully shaped, stacked against one another like a jigsaw puzzle drawn by a cosmic hand. Then you turn around and see the quarry. It's on the other side of the valley, not just down a hill, but across the Urubamba River and up the sheer opposite cliff face. No bridge connects it to the site, no causeway, no track. Just a ragged forested descent to a fast-flowing river, followed by a brutal climb. And yet, here these stones are, resting high above the valley, gently aligned, fitted without mortar. Let's pause for a moment and say it out loud. We have no idea how they got here. Mainstream explanations rely on familiar tools, ropes, ramps, rolling logs. They suggest the Inca moved the stones during the dry season when the river was low and used temporary bridges or rafts. It's possible. But rafting 60-ton boulders across a churning Andean river, dragging them up a cliff face and positioning them with precision that rivals laser-measured construction, that's not a theory, that's an act of faith. And the deeper you look, the more the puzzle pieces refuse to fit. Some of the stones in the Sun Temple wall appear unfinished, slightly askew mid-placement. They lean awkward and unresolved, like workers simply vanished mid-shift. One block is tilted back, another sits a few inches off from perfect alignment, and still others rest against the wall, as if waiting to be slid into place. This isn't wear and tear. This is a project interrupted by what theories abound: a catastrophe, a war, a cultural collapse, or something stranger. Whatever the case, the builders, whoever they were, didn't finish, or weren't allowed to. And yet, even unfinished, the stones radiate impossible craftsmanship. You trace the familiar Andean touch, strange knobs on the faces of the block's protrusions with no clear structural function. Some suggest they were part of the transport process. Others think they're symbolic. Still others whisper that the knobs are remnants of a technology we can't comprehend, a code in stone not meant to be understood by eyes alone. And then you start to notice something even weirder. These megalithic blocks don't match the style of the surrounding structures. The terraces below are neatly stacked fieldstones, unmistakably Incan. But the foundation of the Sun Temple, it's cut from a different mindset, a different hand. This is a pattern you've seen before. At Sacsayhuaman, the older stones are larger, more precise, more complex. At Machu Picchu, the deepest layers are seamless and curvilinear, while the Incan additions are polygonal and angular. And here at Ollantaytambo, the same inversion occurs. The lower you go, the better the craftsmanship becomes. History apparently is upside down, and that leads to the uncomfortable theory: the Inca didn't build the Sun Temple. Not the core of it anyway. Like the Romans at Baalbek, like the Tiwanaku at Pumapunku, the Inca may have arrived at a place already ancient, already powerful, and adopted it. Not because they were primitive. The Inca were brilliant. Their agricultural terracing was a masterclass in climate optimization. Each terrace had its own microclimate perfect for testing and cultivating crops. Their irrigation channels carried water with mathematical precision. The layout of their cities echoed constellations. Their engineering was impeccable, but even they didn't claim credit for the stones of the Sun Temple. According to oral tradition, the site was built by Viracocha's followers, beings who came before the Inca, who taught them, guided them, and then disappeared. And that brings us to the face in the mountain. Just beyond the terraces, high on the cliff wall, carved into the natural rock, is the profile of a giant human face. It's rough, weathered, but its unmistakable forehead, nose, chin. Some say it's Tunupa, others say Viracocha. Still others say it's just pareidolia, our brain trying to find order in the chaos of stone. But you stand there under the stare of that ancient face, surrounded by stones, no one can explain, and you feel it again, that nudge in your spine. That slow, quiet awareness that history isn't a story we finished writing. It's a story we stumbled into halfway through. And the question lingers, what if this wasn't a temple or a fortress at all? What if it was a map or an observatory, or something we don't even have a word for? Because when the solstice sun rises, it shines directly between two mountain peaks and hits the Sun Temple wall. The shadows it casts move precisely along the stones, marking time like a celestial clock. There are even alignments between the temple, the river, and constellations that would have been significant to ancient skywatchers. So maybe it wasn't just a place of kings and priests. Maybe it was a node, a connection point between the earth and the sky, the sacred and the scientific. Or maybe it was a message, one we're only beginning to decipher. The Inca were the last to touch it, but they weren't the first. And every time you look at those half-finished blocks, those distant quarries, that mountain face, that watches but never speaks, you begin to sense it. You're walking through the ruins of something that never got to finish its sentence. And whatever that sentence was, it was written in stone. The Andes fall away behind you now, but the echo of Ollantaytambo's forgotten sentence still rattles around in your mind. You've seen stones so heavy, they shame our machine's alignments, that follow stars more faithfully than clocks, and walls that hold secrets tighter than vaults. But tonight, your path leads east across the sea, far from mountain peaks, and into the sands. You arrive in Egypt, not the Egypt of postcards and pyramids, not yet. You don't start at Giza. No, you drift quietly to a site buried beneath the tourism and headlines, a place older than the pharaohs, quieter, stranger. Welcome to Abydos, and within it, the Osirian. The desert breathes differently here. Hot air moves slow, like it's thinking. The ground beneath your feet feels less like sand and more like memory, something dense, heavy layered. You walk through the main temple complex, all familiar hieroglyphs and columns, and then descend towards something that doesn't fit, down a staircase, below ground, into shadow. And suddenly, you're standing in front of the Osirian, a megalithic structure carved deep into the bedrock. It's partially flooded now, its central core surrounded by dark water. But you can still see it, massive rectangular pillars of red Aswan granite, arranged in a formation that screams ritual function, or maybe both. The stones are unmistakably ancient, but not in the hieroglyphic covered sense. They're blank, smooth, mute. Each block is between 30 and 50 tons, and they don't display the traditional marks of dynastic Egyptian carving. No gods, no kings, no afterlife spells, just structure. The mainstream narrative says this was built during the reign of Seti I, around 1290 BCE. But that doesn't make sense, because Seti's own temple, situated right next to it, is built from much smaller, neatly inscribed stones in typical New Kingdom style. In fact, Seti seemed to have discovered the Osirian, not constructed it. He built around it as if reverently preserving something already ancient in his time. You step closer, eyeing the stones. They're so precisely fitted that even the gaps, if any, look intentional. There's no sign of tool marks, no quarry scars. And the layout of the Osirian. It's not Egyptian, it's megalithic. The floor plan forms a central rectangular core surrounded by chambers and a stone trench, like a minimalist echo of something far older, almost Atlantean in its symmetry. Some researchers have compared its design not to Egyptian temples, but to pre-dynastic sanctuaries, those that may have existed before history began. And that's where the water's muddy. Because unlike the carefully aligned structures of Giza, the Osirian seems deliberately hidden, submerged, forgotten. Egyptologists argue it's simply a ritual, a symbolic place tied to the underworld god Osiris. But if that were true, why use the most unyielding and heavy stone available? Why dig below the temple into the earth? You kneel by the flooded center, stare at your own reflection in the still water. There's something unsettling here, not frightening, but unfamiliar. The Osirian doesn't feel like a temple for the dead. It feels like infrastructure, like a chamber meant to do something. Some believe it may once have been part of a water-based energy system, where the flow of underground aquifers interacted with the stone's natural frequency to create resonance. The granite high in quartz content is piezoelectric, meaning it can convert mechanical stress into electric charge. Far-fetched, maybe. But in a world where Tesla existed, are we so sure ancient minds couldn't feel the same pull? Then there's the matter of the flowers. Along the rear wall, high above eye level, there are carvings that many believe were added much later, maybe even thousands of years after the structure was built. These include the famous light bulb images, a scene many fringe theorists claim depicts ancient electricity or vacuum tubes. Egyptologists dismiss this as a symbolic scene from the Dendera light mythos, but the placement, high, awkward, and deeply inset, raises more questions than it answers. Were these glyphs added by a culture who rediscovered the Osirian and tried to make sense of it? Much like children scribbling on the walls of a control room they don't understand. Historians still argue whether the Osirian is a late-period ceremonial chamber, or a surviving relic from a civilization long before dynastic Egypt. A civilization that knew how to work with stone in ways we can't replicate. And here's where the theory takes a leap. What if the Osirian wasn't an Egyptian construction at all, but a pre-flood structure? Something that endured when the world changed. Something inherited by the Egyptians who knew enough to honor it, but not enough to replicate it. That timeline would place the Osirian's original construction at 10,000 BCE or earlier, a time when, according to mainstream history, humanity was just learning to farm. Yet, here it is, not just present but precise, durable, silent. So why don't we hear more about it? Maybe because it doesn't fit, not in museums, not in textbooks. The Osirian is like a fossil from a species we don't acknowledge, existed, a throwback to something deliberately forgotten. As you rise and circle the flooded chamber, you notice how the air feels different here, charged, as if the stone still remembers what it was meant to do, as if it's waiting to be reactivated or decoded. You place your hand on the nearest granite block. It's warm, not sun-warmed, internally warm, like it holds its own temperature. You listen, and if you're very quiet, you swear you can almost hear it. Not a voice, not words, just resonance. A frequency below hearing, a sensation in your bones, like the earth itself humming a note too low to name. This isn't a tomb, it's not a temple. It's a memory device built not to house gods or kings, but to survive, to remind, to endure what came before, and what might come again. You ascend the stairs once more, returning to the surface, blinking in the harsh Egyptian sun, and suddenly, the whole desert feels like a stage set, with the real story hidden below. The Osirian doesn't ask for faith, it demands inquiry. And in that dark chamber beneath the sand, something ancient stirs. Waiting. You leave Abydos with dust on your boots and a weight on your mind. The Osirian refuses to fade, its silence is louder than words, echoing like a thought you can't finish. But before you can make sense of it, the desert pulls you westward, toward the most famous mystery of them all, toward the icon that launched 1,000 theories. The Great Pyramid of Giza. You know the image well. 3 pyramids, perfectly aligned, rising from the Giza plateau like stone teeth biting the sky. But images dull truth. Photographs turn mysteries into monuments. When you finally stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, you feel it. Not awe, not reverence. Something deeper, something colder. This thing is not from here. Let's strip away the tourist brochures and the fuzzy documentaries. Let's just do the math. The Great Pyramid, Khufu's pyramid, is made from an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stone. Each block weighs between 2 and 30 tons, with some interior blocks reaching 80 tons. The structure stands over 480 feet tall. It was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. Now the kicker, it's aligned to true north with a margin of error of less than 1/15th of a degree. Let that sink in. To this day, we don't know exactly how it was built. Theories abound, ramps, levers, sledges, but no single explanation accounts for the scale, the precision, and the materials. For example, the outer casing stones, now largely stripped away, were made from polished Tura limestone. Smooth white, gleaming in the sun. When intact, the pyramid would have glowed blinding like a beacon. The core stones were heavier, rougher limestone. But the inner chambers, they used Aswan granite, hauled from nearly 500 miles away. And here's the part that gives engineers nightmares. The granite blocks in the king's chamber were lifted to a height of over 100 feet without modern cranes, using Stone Age tools. Allegedly. But when you walk inside through the narrow ascending passage and finally squeeze into the king's chamber itself, the illusion breaks. The room is bare, silent, and yet every surface hums. The dimensions are precise to within half an inch. The stones are so tightly fitted that not even a razor blade slips between them. And the ceiling, made of granite beams, weighing 60 tons each, stacked in relieving chambers, designed to absorb the pressure of the stone above. Ask a builder today to recreate it. Watch them squirm. Because this wasn't just construction, it was engineering. It was philosophy in stone. And then there's the alignment. The 3 pyramids of Giza are aligned with Orion's belt. Not kind of aligned, precisely aligned. The layout mirrors the stars with mathematical intent. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point directly at key stars, including Alnitak Thuban and Sirius, important in both ancient mythology and modern astronomy. Coincidence? Maybe, but remember, this structure predates telescopes. It predates the compass. It predates written star charts. And yet, it tracks the heavens. Historians still argue whether the pyramid was a tomb, a calendar, or something else entirely. There's no hieroglyphic record in the pyramid itself, no inscriptions, no carvings, no body of Khufu, just stone. It's as if the builders didn't want to explain. They wanted the pyramid to speak for itself, and some say it does. Acoustic researchers have discovered that the king's chamber resonates at around 440 Hz, a tone close to the human voice. Sound behaves strangely inside. A whisper can carry while footsteps vanish. Some believe the pyramid was designed not just to align with the sky, but to amplify sound to create resonance, even transformation. Add to that the piezoelectric properties of the granite, the presence of underground aquifers beneath the structure, and the unusual temperature regulation of the inner chambers. And suddenly, you're not looking at a tomb. You're looking at a machine. What kind of machine? No one agrees. Some propose it was an energy generator converting vibrational frequencies into usable power. Others think it was a stellar observatory, or even a spiritual initiation chamber designed to stimulate altered states of consciousness. And then there are the outliers, the researchers who claim the Great Pyramid is much older than Khufu, that it predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, that Khufu merely repurposed it, not built it. This idea isn't as fringe as it once was. Weathering patterns on the Sphinx suggest prolonged water erosion inconsistent with Egypt's climate over the last 5,000 years. That's led some to propose that parts of the Giza complex may date back to 10,000 BCE, or earlier perhaps to a forgotten civilization erased by catastrophe. And here's where everything starts to converge. Because Baalbek, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, the Osirian, and now Giza, each site features stonework too massive to move easily, demonstrates precision engineering beyond the culture it's credited to, contains astronomical alignments, suggests a structure that's not just functional but symbolic, even resonant, and all hint at something older than written history. This is no longer about one pyramid, it's about a pattern. You stand outside now watching the sun dip behind the limestone horizon and feel the weight of the Great Pyramid pressing inward. Not with mass, but with meaning. It refuses to be solved. It absorbs theory, like stone absorbs heat, slowly, stubbornly. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the pyramid wasn't meant to be understood. Maybe it was meant to survive to be a question we keep asking long after the answers disappeared in sand and shadow. Because the Great Pyramid doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to. It just stands, watching, waiting, and beneath its gaze you begin to understand something terrifying. History didn't begin here. It was already well underway. You leave the Giza plateau reluctantly turning your back on the vast stone puzzle that refuses to be solved. The desert behind you whispers in ancient tongues, the wind full of sand and secrets. But Egypt still has one more riddle, one more monument that dares to break time open. You head south now following the Nile until the temples thin out. The tourists disappear and only silence remains. And then, like a phantom rising from the bedrock, you find it the unfinished obelisk of Aswan. At first, it doesn't look like much, just a huge stone slab half buried in a quarry. But when you get closer, when you realize what you're really looking at, it knocks the breath right out of you. This isn't just any block of stone. It's a monolith over 137 feet long, weighing an estimated 1,200 tons. That's right, 1,200 tons. The largest known obelisk ever attempted in human history. And it lies cracked incomplete, still fused to the bedrock from which it was born. According to mainstream archaeology, this obelisk was ordered during the reign of Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs. But a fatal fracture appeared in the stone during carving, forcing the workers to abandon the project. That's the official story, but you run your hand along the obelisk's side and feel something else, something not quite explained by tools or time. The sides are astonishingly smooth, not just roughly carved but polished with surgical precision. You look closer and see deep, narrow channels where the stone was being separated from the quarry floor. The conventional theory is that workers pounded away at the granite using dolerite balls, a kind of hard stone hammer, and gradually carved out the shape by sheer brute force. It sounds plausible until you do the math. To remove this much granite by hand using stone balls with no steel or iron would have taken decades. And we're supposed to believe they gave up just like that because of a single crack. And even if they did, where are the tool marks? Where are the piles of debris? The thousands of broken hammers? Where are the supporting structures needed to transport this behemoth had it been completed? Because here's the part most people miss. This obelisk wasn't carved as a test or a novelty. It was intended to stand, to rise. But how? How would the ancient Egyptians have lifted a 1,200-ton monolith? No pulley system on Earth at that time could have handled such weight. Even today, our largest cranes struggle with that kind of mass. And yet, other obelisks from the same era were transported. The Lateran obelisk, now in Rome, weighs over 450 tons and was successfully moved across continents. How the logistics alone would require a level of coordination, knowledge, and force that we barely understand. And that's just the physical aspect. Now consider the symbolic. Obelisks weren't just tall rocks. They were spiritual conductors, representations of the Ben stone, the mythic pillar on which the first rays of the sun landed during the creation of the world. They were cosmic antennae connecting heaven and earth. The unfinished obelisk, then, was not just a monument. It was a message, a cosmic tuning fork meant to hum with energy to mark a spot where geometry, geology, and spirituality aligned. But something went wrong. You can't help but wonder, was the crack natural? Or was it a sign, a disruption, an event? One that forced a sudden halt to a project not just ambitious, but dangerous. Some researchers believe the obelisk was being constructed using unknown tools or techniques. They point to the precision of the cut lines, clean uniform, as if done by a giant lathe or saw. Others have proposed the use of sound frequencies to vibrate and separate stone, a technology hinted at in Egyptian myths, where the gods used tones and chants to shape the world. Fringe, maybe. But again, the stones refuse to align with the narrative, because if the unfinished obelisk had been completed and raised, it would have stood taller than any structure in the ancient world. A single piece of granite towering above all others, a symbol of power, a technological experiment, a failed beacon. Historians still argue whether the obelisk's failure was due to engineering limits or something more. And here's the strangest part of all, nobody touched it since. It's just there, half carved, half born, a sleeping giant never awoken, as if later generations knew to leave it alone, or couldn't comprehend how to continue. It becomes a kind of monument to potential, to what might have been. And in that silence, you begin to feel its weight, not just physical, but historical. This one block of stone challenges everything we think we know about ancient capabilities. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If they could carve this, what else could they do? The unfinished obelisk is the architectural equivalent of an unfinished sentence, a thought too big to finish, too strange to ignore, and maybe, just maybe, never meant to be completed. As you climb out of the quarry and look back one last time, you realize something profound. Sometimes the most powerful monuments aren't the ones that stand tall. They're the ones that lie in waiting, still fused to the earth, still whispering, still watching. You leave the silence of the quarry, and it follows you. That 200-ton shadow sticks to your back, even as the Nile disappears behind the horizon. You've now seen the puzzle pieces, massive stones, impossible alignments, unfinished monuments. But one place ties it all together. One site that many believe may hold the key to everything we've seen so far. The land of Göbekli Tepe. You travel north now, far beyond Egypt's sun-bleached sands, into southeastern Turkey. Here the land is dry but fertile. The hills roll with soft curves, the kind that hide secrets easily. And tucked into one such hill, once mistaken for just another bump in the earth, is a site that rewrote history. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in the 1990s, but it lay buried for nearly 12,000 years. Not by accident, not by erosion, but by deliberate burial. That's right. This place wasn't ruined and forgotten. It was covered, carefully, as if someone wanted it hidden. Why? You'll find out. But first, take a step into the dig site and prepare to feel very, very small. Because you're standing in the middle of what is, by all accounts, the oldest known temple complex on Earth. Built during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, Göbekli Tepe dates back to 9600 BCE, a time when, according to every textbook you've ever read, humans were still chasing gazelles with sharp sticks. We weren't supposed to be doing this yet. We weren't supposed to have monumental architecture, or organized religion, or symbolic art on this scale. And yet, here it is. right beneath your feet. Massive T-shaped pillars carved from limestone weighing between 10 and 20 tons each, arranged in circular enclosures. Some are nearly 20 feet tall. At the center of each ring are two towering pillars facing one another like frozen sentinels. Around them, more stones form the walls, an architecture of precision and pattern. No mortar, no wheels, no metal tools, just Stone Age humans doing something they weren't supposed to do. You run your hand over one of the central pillars and feel the carvings. Foxes, snakes, cranes, scorpions, lions. But not just random animal symbols. They're stylized, positioned with intent. The carvings are in relief, not just scratched in. Some are even three-dimensional part of the stone itself, as if the pillar was born this way. And here's where it gets strange. There are no signs of habitation, no hearths, no food preparation areas, no burial chambers, no bones, human or animal. Just architecture. Sacred architecture. Which means this wasn't a village, it wasn't a city. It was a ritual site built purely for spiritual or ceremonial purposes. Think about that. This site predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the pyramids by 7,000 years. It was built before pottery, before the wheel, before writing. And it was already complex. The mainstream narrative had to shift dramatically after Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists began to admit that maybe religion didn't evolve after agriculture as we used to think. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe people started farming because they needed to feed the labor force required to build places like this. But here's the part that most history books still don't mention. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just old, it was layered. There are multiple enclosures, some visible, many still buried. The deeper you go, the older and more precise the construction becomes. Enclosure D, for example, is the most refined, perfectly cut pillars, exquisite carvings aligned to astronomical positions. Later enclosures are less refined, smaller, rougher. Sound familiar? Just like Machu Picchu, just like Sacsayhuaman, just like the Osirian. The deeper you go, the better the craftsmanship becomes. History once again appears upside down. And the burial. It wasn't done in a single event. Over time, the site was intentionally backfilled with rubble bones and debris. Stone walls were collapsed pillars, buried surfaces hidden. It was as if some group decided to erase the site completely. Not to preserve it, to forget it. Historians still argue whether this was a ritual act, a societal shift, or a reaction to catastrophe. Some believe a cosmic event like a comet impact or climate disruption may have spurred radical change. Indeed, researchers point to a layer of black mat sediment around 10,800 BCE evidence of a sudden cooling event known as the Younger Dryas. It's theorized that this abrupt return to glacial conditions could have decimated civilizations across the globe. Some even speculate this was the inspiration behind the Great Flood myths seen in dozens of ancient cultures. Could Göbekli Tepe have been one of the last beacons of a pre-flood civilization? And if so, who were they? The people who built Göbekli Tepe didn't just have manpower, they had vision. They understood astronomy, geometry, symbolism, myth. They left no writing, and yet their message still shouts from the stone. Because when you look at the arrangement of pillars, the animals, the positioning, something stirs. You realize you're not in a temple, you're in a cosmic diagram. Each enclosure appears to mark the passage of time, the movement of the heavens. Some believe the animals represent constellations, a prehistoric zodiac. Others point to specific carvings as symbols of cataclysm, a vulture holding a circular disc, scorpions, aligned with star maps, even what some interpret as a comet striking Earth. In 2017, a study proposed that the central pillars of one enclosure commemorate a cosmic impact event around 10,950 BCE, the same time the Younger Dryas began. Could Göbekli Tepe be not just a temple, but a warning, a record of what came before? a message for those who would come after. One thing is certain, whoever built it, they knew we'd be back. Because even under thousands of years of soil, even hidden from view, Göbekli Tepe still radiates something ancient, something unfinished. Like the unfinished obelisk, like the buried layers of Machu Picchu, like the silent Osirian. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like a memory, a whispered reminder that history isn't linear. It moves in circles, like the rings of stone beneath your feet. And as the sun sets over the Turkish hills, casting long shadows through the standing stones, you feel it again, that quiet certainty. We were not the first. The chill of Göbekli Tepe trails you like breath in cold air. It's not just the age of the stones that lingers, it's the feeling that someone once knew far more than we give them credit for. You leave the highlands of Turkey, but you don't descend back into modernity. Instead, you dive deeper into an even stranger place. A place beneath the sea where stone roads stretch into the ocean like veins of a forgotten world. You're heading to Yonaguni, Japan. At the southernmost tip of the Japanese archipelago lies the Ryukyu Islands scattered like pebbles across the Pacific. And just off the coast of Yonaguni, beneath about 80 to 100 feet of turquoise water, waits a structure that shouldn't exist. They call it the Yonaguni Monument. But calling it a monument implies we understand what it is. We don't. The water is warm here, calm on the surface. But beneath, divers descend into a place that feels more like a temple than a reef. Giant stone platforms rise from the ocean floor in geometric shapes, sharp corners, right angles, long steps, flat terraces. The main structure is over 165 feet long, with multiple level stairways and what appear to be paths and pillars. At first glance, it looks man-made. Strikingly so. The lines are too clean, the shapes too deliberate. Divers compare it to a submerged ziggurat or a sunken city. But here's where it gets strange. Many geologists argue it's completely natural. They say the sandstone bedrock fractured along natural fault lines, eroded by tides and tectonic shifts. The right angles, coincidence. The platforms, just wave-sculpted rock. And maybe that would be convincing if the formation existed in isolation. But it doesn't. All around Yonaguni, other anomalies appear. Giant megalithic blocks separate from the bedrock rest nearby. Some seem to have been cut and moved. Others sit upright as if placed. There are stone channels, carved holes, and even what looks like a circular basin, perhaps once used for water storage or ritual. And there's one feature that freezes your breath of face. Carved into the rock, large eroded haunting, is what many believe to be a human face, stylized and weathered, but unmistakably intentional. Its proportions match other examples of East Asian statuary. Its presence, difficult to explain by nature alone. Japanese marine geologist Masaki Kimura has spent years studying the site. He's convinced the structure is artificial, at least modified by human hands. According to Kimura, the features include steps, terraces, roadways, and a stadium-like area possibly used for public gatherings or ceremonies. But the big question remains if it was made by humans. When? Here's the catch: Yonaguni was above sea level until the end of the last ice age. Around 10,000 years ago, rising sea levels triggered by the melting of glaciers submerged large parts of coastal Asia. Which means if the Yonaguni monument is man-made, it had to be constructed before 10,000 BCE. Let that settle. That's the same time frame as Göbekli Tepe, and far older than any known civilization in Japan, which mainstream archaeology places at around 3000 BCE with the Jomon culture. So the site forces a choice. Either it's a natural formation bizarrely shaped by tectonics and tides, or it's the remains of a lost civilization wiped out by rising seas, its memory drowned long before history began. Historians still argue whether we're seeing nature or intention. But when you dive deeper, literally and figuratively, you start to find hints that Yonaguni isn't alone. Around the world, similar underwater structures have been discovered. Off the coast of Cuba, Sonar scans in the early 2000s revealed geometric shapes, grids, pyramids, lying over 2,000 feet below the surface. Near India's Gulf of Kambat, another submerged city was found, complete with pottery shards, bones, and stone tools dating back possibly 9,000 years. In the Mediterranean submerged ruins near Malta and Greece, echo stories of ancient cities lost to the waves. The sea, it seems, is not just a grave, it's a library, and that makes the Yonaguni Monument a possible front cover to something much larger. Even local legends support the mystery. Okinawan myths speak of an ancient land called Mu, a kingdom swallowed by the ocean, whose people fled to higher ground. The story mirrors the tale of Atlantis, or the flood of Gilgamesh, or Noah's Ark. Different tongues, same rhythm. The sea rises. The world is remade. You rise slowly from the dive, the sunlight shimmering through waves above. As your body adjusts to the surface, your mind struggles to return to solid ground. Because if Yonaguni is real, if it's proof of an ancient organized seafaring civilization, then everything changes. The timeline collapses. The map redraws itself, and suddenly, the world's flood myths stop sounding like metaphors and start feeling like eyewitness accounts. You sit on the boat deck now, drying off, staring back at the waves. Somewhere beneath you lies a story that no one can quite finish. A sentence interrupted by water. You can't help but wonder what else is hiding down there. Because if one city sank, how many others followed? The waves of Yonaguni recede behind you, but the questions they stir ripple onward. You've now traveled from mountaintop citadels to underwater monuments, from deserts to temples that predate time. But sometimes, to understand the ancient, you must go inward, deep beneath the surface, not into the sea, but into stone itself. Tonight you enter the Longyu Caves. Set in the rolling hills of Zhejiang province in eastern China, the caves are not marked by grand monuments or towering spires. No, they are hidden, disguised by nature and time, until a farmer in 1992 decided to do something simple: drain a mysterious pond. What he found wasn't a natural cavity, it wasn't a reservoir, it was an immense man-made cavern carved directly into solid siltstone, and then another, and another. By the time the local government took notice, they had identified 24 massive underground chambers, each meticulously sculpted, each utterly inexplicable. No written record, no historical mention, not a single scroll tablet or tale, just vast, echoing silence. You step inside the first chamber. The temperature drops instantly. Cool air clings to the walls, dense and ancient. The ceiling arches above you like the inside of a ship's hull. The floor is level, dry, and swept clean. And the walls, oh, the walls. Every inch is covered in parallel chisel marks, running in perfect patterns like ancient code. They aren't random. They follow the contours of the chamber up the walls, across the ceiling, even down into narrow alcoves. It's as if the builders etched intention into the stone itself. Each cave is enormous. Some rise nearly 100 feet high, covering over 30,000 square feet of space. Yet none of the caves connect. Each was excavated as a self-contained unit with incredible symmetry and structural soundness. No collapses, no cave-ins, just immaculate geometry. Let that sink in. These are gigantic hand-carved underground spaces dug without modern machinery, in hard rock with no signs of error. No slip-ups, no half-finished alcoves, no collapsed supports. And remember, the builders had no explosives, no electricity, just stone tools if the mainstream story is to be believed. But that's where the contradictions pile up. To create even one cave of this size would have required removing an estimated 1 million cubic meters of stone. Multiply that by 24, and you're looking at a removal effort larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And where is that stone? Nowhere. There's no evidence of spoil piles nearby, no stone debris in local construction, no record of what became of it. It's as if the rock was swallowed into the earth. Then there's the logistics. To dig these caves with hand tools would have taken decades, maybe centuries. You'd need a massive organized labor force, engineers, architects, artisans, scribes, someone to plan, someone to execute, someone to record. But again, no records, no legends, no myths, not even a local story passed down about the Great Hollowing. It's as if the caves simply appeared. Even stranger, the interiors show no signs of habitation, no fire pits, no soot, no furniture, no animal remains. It's as if the caves were not meant to be lived in, but perhaps used for something else. Ritual, storage, resonance. Some scholars have proposed that the caves were designed as water storage systems. But if that were the case, why the elaborate craftsmanship? Why carve perfect geometric patterns, leaving behind architectural details that serve no utilitarian purpose? Others suggest they were tombs, or perhaps places of retreat hidden away from the world. But again, there are no bones, no burial goods, no markings of religious purpose. One fringe theory suggests the caves were part of an ancient acoustic network, the angles and smooth surfaces amplifying sound in unique ways. Some researchers who visited report echoes that behave strangely, reverberating not outward, but inward, like sound trapped inside a bell. That brings us back to the markings. Those parallel chisels overlapping uniform and inexplicably consistent appear in every chamber. It's been suggested that they weren't just decorative. They may have served a functional purpose, perhaps tied to vibration frequency or even information encoding. But we simply don't know. Historians still argue whether the Longyu Caves are the work of a forgotten imperial project or something far older. Some posit a lost civilization, one that flourished before the Yellow River Valley dynasties and vanished without leaving behind more than hollow stone and faint echoes. There's one last detail. The caves are stable, perfectly so. Despite their massive size, no supports were left inside. No beams, no buttresses. And yet they've survived for over 2,000 years, possibly much longer without collapse. Engineers marvel at the balance of weight and angle, the subtle curvature of the ceilings, the way load-bearing points are distributed. It suggests a level of architectural understanding that matches modern standards, or exceeds them. You walk deeper into one chamber. Your footsteps echo in a strange rhythm. You speak softly, and the walls answer. Not with words, but with a presence, a stillness that feels alive. You start to wonder, what were these caves meant to protect, or contain, or preserve? Because if these chambers were hollowed to last, to outlive their builders, then maybe they weren't meant for people at all. Maybe they were meant for memory. A library not of books, but of stone. A message not written, but carved patiently, quietly into the bones of the earth. You reach the end of the chamber. There is no altar, no treasure. Just one final sloping wall patterned with chisels, like a final breath. You run your hand along the groove, and for a second you feel connection, as if someone's hand had passed here before yours, centuries or millennia ago, leaving not a mark, but an echo. And in that moment, a whisper forms in your mind. Not in Chinese, not in words, just a feeling. We were here. You leave the Longyu Caves behind, those echoing cathedrals beneath the soil, and return once again to the surface world, where the sky stretches wide, and history, at least as we're told, marches forward in a straight line. But you're beginning to see the curve in that story. The places you visited all suggest something circular, cyclical. Lost knowledge, buried brilliance, and now something pulled from the sea, delicate as bone, complex as thought. Your next destination isn't a monument, but a machine. It begins with a shipwreck. In 1901, off the coast of the tiny Greek island of Antikythera, sponge divers descended into the Aegean Sea and stumbled upon an ancient Roman cargo vessel. The wreck was loaded with statues, pottery, and artifacts, typical trade goods of the ancient world. But what lay hidden among the coral and rusted armor was not typical at all. It was a small, heavily corroded hunk of bronze, so encrusted it resembled nothing more than a chunk of melted metal. Until it cracked open, and what emerged was something wrong. Something impossible. Gears, cogs, rotating wheels, teeth precisely cut, numbers and Greek inscriptions so tiny they had to be read under magnification. The thing was mechanical, not decorative, not symbolic, functional. Today we call it the Antikythera mechanism, and it is widely considered the world's first analog computer, an ancient astronomical calculator built more than 2,000 years ago. Pause and absorb that. This wasn't a sundial or an abacus. It was a complex gear-driven device capable of predicting solar and lunar eclipses, tracking the phases of the moon, mapping the positions of planets, and following intricate astronomical cycles, like the Metonic cycle, which reconciles lunar months with the solar year over a 19-year period. That alone would be enough to turn history on its head. But it gets stranger. Modern reconstructions, aided by X-ray tomography and 3D modeling, suggest the mechanism once contained at least 37 interlocking gears made from carefully cast bronze, mounted in a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Some of the gears had triangular teeth like modern mechanical clocks. Others tracked lunar anomalies. One gear even had a differential, a mechanism used to compute the difference between two rotational speeds, something that wouldn't be seen again until the 16th century. Historians still argue over how something this complex could have existed so long ago, because according to the textbooks, the Greeks didn't possess the precision tools needed to manufacture such things. And yet, here it is. So who made it? Some believe it came from Rhodes, where a tradition of mechanical engineering was known to exist. Others link it to the legacy of Archimedes, who reportedly created intricate devices that mimicked the motion of the heavens. But no workshop has ever been found. No writings describing how to build such a thing. No second example, just this one. And that might be the most chilling part. Because the Antikythera mechanism doesn't feel like a prototype, it feels like the result of a long tradition. A perfected object, elegant in design, complex in thought, which suggests it wasn't unique. It was the survivor of a technology that once flourished before vanishing completely. Why did it vanish? That's where the story sinks into the deeper currents of history. Wars, fires, regime changes. Libraries burned, most famously the Library of Alexandria, where it's said that entire civilizations' worth of knowledge went up in smoke. Could the instructions for building mechanisms like this have perished there? Could centuries of technological advancement have been erased in a single generation? Or was it intentional? Some fringe researchers speculate that the Antikythera mechanism wasn't just a calculator, but a calendar of catastrophe tracking cycles of celestial events tied to major upheavals on Earth. They point to ancient beliefs in astronomical alignments, triggering floods, famines, or resets. Eclipses were feared not just as omens, but as warnings. Could it have predicted more than shadows on the moon? Could it have marked when civilizations fall? Mainstream scholars remain skeptical, of course. But even they admit that this device proves the ancients were capable of far more than we've credited them with. The craftsmanship, the mathematics, the ability to miniaturize astronomical data into a portable mechanical form. All of it suggests a mind or minds on par with modern engineering. But where did that knowledge go? Why was it never passed down? Why do we go from a machine like this to nothing? No successors, no manuals, no mechanical tradition in Europe or the Middle East for another 1,000 years. You sit with that thought, on the edge of the island looking out at the same sea that swallowed the shipwreck, the same sea that still hides secrets in its cold blue depths. It occurs to you that maybe history isn't just what we remember. Maybe it's also what we lose and then choose not to rediscover. Because the Antikythera mechanism wasn't lost by accident. It was forgotten. Or more disturbingly, it was erased. And so you sit in the twilight, imagining the moment this device was built. the steady hand engraving its markings, the artisan who turned the final gear, the philosopher who wound it forward, watching the heavens tick into place like clockwork. Then a storm, a sinking, and silence, until a sponge diver finds it again 2,000 years later. A machine out of time, a whisper from a civilization that once dared to model the cosmos in bronze and then vanished beneath the waves. You step away from the quiet elegance of the Antikythera mechanism and into the dry golden hills of the Middle East. The idea of ancient machines is still turning in your mind, the feel of bronze gears ticking like phantom pulses in your fingertips. But now something older calls, not mechanical precision, but crude simplicity. Earth clay and something electric hidden within the past. Tonight you stand before the enigma of the Baghdad Battery. You're in Iraq now, near the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, birthplace of writing kings and temples that scraped the sky. Somewhere between Babylon and Baghdad, a small ceramic object sits behind museum glass. It's easy to miss, humble, almost forgettable, until you look closer. A clay jar. Inside it, a copper cylinder. Inside that, an iron rod. No decoration, no inscription. Just parts, stacked, tucked within one another. It doesn't scream mystery, it whispers it. This artifact was discovered in the 1930s in the area of Kujut Rabu near Baghdad. It's dated to the Parthian period around 250 BCE to 250 CE. At first glance, it looked like a storage vessel, perhaps for scrolls or papyrus. But then, a German archaeologist, Wilhelm König, proposed a stunning possibility. This wasn't a container, it was a battery. He suggested that if the jar were filled with an acidic solution, like vinegar or lemon juice, it could produce a small electric current. A galvanic cell thousands of years before Alessandro Volta made the first modern battery in 1800. And here's the part that makes your pulse jump. Tests conducted later proved it. The replica worked. A mild current, not enough to power your phone or light a bulb, but enough to electroplate metal, enough to shock a small creature, enough to imply that someone somewhere understood electricity. But how could ancient people, who left no written record of electrical understanding, construct something that behaves like a modern battery? Historians still argue whether the Baghdad Battery was ever used this way. Some insist it was simply a storage vessel. Others believe it was part of a religious ritual, perhaps meant to induce a tingling sensation during temple ceremonies, adding an air of the divine to contact with idols. But here's where it gets more intriguing. In nearby regions, ancient Sumer-Akkad Babylon, there are depictions of objects that glow. There are lenses made of quartz and stories of divine tools that seem to produce heat or light. Could the Baghdad Battery be part of a larger technological tradition now lost to time? Some fringe researchers believe this is just the tip of a submerged iceberg, that ancient cultures may have had access to electrochemical principles not unlike our own. Not widespread power grids, of course, but isolated knowledge used for ritual alchemy or symbolic science. Consider this: why would they hide it? Or perhaps the better question is, why wouldn't they? Electricity is invisible, silent, mysterious. If you didn't know the science, it would look like magic. And in a world of oracles and omens, a touch of static could crown a priest with godlike status. You imagine it now, a chamber dimly lit, an idol wrapped in metal leaf, and behind it, unseen by the common people, a priest touches a wire. The metal glows faintly. The faithful gasp. The gods have spoken. Is that science or sorcery? Historians still debate whether the device was even functional or just coincidentally resembles a battery. But the arrangement of materials is deliberate, and the fact that multiple jars like this have been found, some with iron and copper components, suggests it wasn't a one-off. So then we're left with a haunting possibility. What if the Baghdad Battery was never meant to be understood? What if it was used faithfully without full comprehension? Just as we use technologies today, we don't always understand. Maybe the makers inherited the design passed down through generations, long after its original purpose had faded. This is a theme you've seen again and again. Precision stonework in Peru whose builders vanished. A sunken staircase in Japan whose purpose is lost. Bronze gears from Greece whose creators left no other trace. Civilizations rise, reach a peak, and then drop off a cliff. The survivors carry torches through the dark, but eventually the fire goes out. And all that's left are artifacts whispering clues. The Baghdad Battery may be one such whisper. Small, unassuming, but world-shaking in its implications. Because if it's real, if it's what some believe it is, then our history of electricity begins not in the 1800s, but more than 2,000 years ago. And that changes everything. It means knowledge isn't linear. It doesn't grow slowly, predictably. It surges, peaks, crashes, and sometimes it slips into clay pots sealed and buried, waiting for the next torchbearer. You stare through the glass at the artifact. It doesn't glow, it doesn't hum, but it pulses in your imagination. Maybe it's just a jar. Maybe it's the battery of a lost civilization. But either way, it reminds you that the boundary between science and legend is thinner than you think. And electricity. It may have always been there, crackling in the background, waiting for someone to reach out and connect. The lingering thought of ancient electricity trails behind you, like the faint scent of ozone after a lightning strike. From clay jars that may have sparked gods, to machines plucked from the sea that mirrored the cosmos, your journey has taught you one unsettling truth. Ancient people weren't just more spiritual than we give them credit for, they may have been far more technologically advanced. And tonight, as you cross the Egyptian sands once more, you're about to meet another object that defies expectation. This time it's not gears or batteries. It's a bird. But not one that flies in the sky today. Tonight, you enter the chambers of Saqqara, Egypt's oldest known necropolis. Tombs rise in layers, here stepped squared eternal. The dead have slept beneath these stones for millennia, wrapped in linen and silence. But it wasn't a mummy that stirred the mystery. It was something far more lightweight, a wooden figurine carved from sycamore, roughly 7 inches long, wings outstretched, tail upturned, no eyes, no feet, a bird, but not quite. When this artifact was first catalogued in 1898, it was labeled simply as a bird-shaped toy. Found in the tomb of Padi Emen, it was set aside, tucked into museum drawers in Cairo for decades. Harmless, decorative, perhaps a child's offering to the gods, until someone looked at it again and noticed something very strange. The wings weren't curved like a bird's. They were straight and flat, more like airplane wings. The tail wasn't horizontal, like in birds, it was vertical, more like a rudder. There was no beak, no feet, no feathers carved in for realism. In fact, it didn't look like a bird at all. It looked like a glider, and when scaled up in models and tested in wind tunnels, the Saqqara bird, as it came to be known, exhibited surprisingly aerodynamic properties. Engineers who studied it in the 1970s and 80s concluded that if equipped with a tail stabilizer, it could fly. Smoothly, efficiently, gracefully. Let that settle. An object from 220 BCE recovered from a tomb may be an ancient attempt at flight. Historians still argue over its purpose. Some insist it was purely symbolic, an offering to Horus the falcon god. Others say it could have been a weather vane, a child's toy, or a simple coincidence of design. But there's a problem with those explanations. First, the symmetry. The wings are crafted with exacting balance. The body is centered. The weight is distributed just right. This is not sloppy woodwork. Second, the vertical tail. There is no known bird in Egypt or anywhere that has a vertical tail plane. Yet that's exactly what you'd find on an aircraft. It provides yaw stability, keeping a glider aligned during flight. Third, the absence of a beak or claws. If this were meant to represent a bird in any religious or symbolic sense, why omit the key features that define a bird in Egyptian iconography? The Egyptians were master craftsmen, they didn't forget the details. And finally, it flies. When models are built to scale and launched, they glide. Not fall, not spin. Glide. Now, before your imagination takes off completely, there's no direct evidence that the ancient Egyptians built full-scale gliders or experimented with flight in any organized sense. There are no launch ramps, no runways, no written records of airborne adventures. But maybe that's the point. Maybe this was the record. A prototype, a model, a memory. One theory suggests the Saqqara bird may have been based on a much older tradition knowledge passed down from a prior civilization, one that understood lift drag and balance well enough to build functioning models. Perhaps the full-scale versions came long before the dynasties, before the pyramids, even before the flood. Just as the Antikythera mechanism felt like a refined product, not a first attempt, the Saqqara bird feels like the echo of something. And echoes often come from something larger. Curiously, some Vedic texts from India describe flying machines called vimanas, chariots of the gods, sometimes depicted with wings and propulsion. Mayan legends speak of sky travelers, and even in the Old Testament, we hear of Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels in the heavens. Flights of fancy, perhaps, but also familiar patterns. What if the Saqqara bird isn't alone? What if it's the only surviving piece of a puzzle that once soared? Historians still wrestle with these questions. Some dismiss it outright. Others wonder if the Egyptians were experimenting with symbolic flight, representing the soul's journey to the afterlife, mimicking the sacred falcon's ascent into the heavens. But symbolism and science aren't mutually exclusive. The Wright brothers studied bird wings too. Leonardo da Vinci sketched flying machines inspired by doves. Our dreams of flying have always lived at the intersection of awe and understanding. You stare at the wooden figure now housed under protective glass. It's small, quiet, almost apologetic in its simplicity. But then you realize something. It's not trying to scream a message. It's waiting for someone who knows how to listen. You imagine a boy in ancient Egypt holding it in his hands, tossing it into the hot breeze, and watching it catch drift and fall. You imagine a craftsman carefully carving the wings, balancing the weight, adjusting the angle. Maybe it was a toy. Maybe it was a ritual tool. Or maybe it was the last fragment of an airborne age, a time when humans didn't just build toward the sky. They rose into it. The Saqqara bird floats gently in your thoughts, like a paper plane riding a dream. Its wings may be wooden, but the idea they carry is heavy, too heavy to ignore. Because if ancient hands once dreamed of the sky in ways we now call aerodynamic, what else might they have touched upon long before us? Tonight, we descend once again, not into a temple or a tomb, or even the ocean, but into the highlands of Tibet, where the air is thin, the land is remote, and the stories strange. You've come to learn about the Dropa stones. It starts in 1938. A Chinese archaeologist, Chi-Pu Te, is leading an expedition into the Bayan Har Mountains, a forbidding stretch of ridges and valleys in Qinghai province. Here, in a series of isolated caves near the border of Tibet, he uncovers something baffling. The caves themselves are unusual, some clearly shaped by human hands. Inside them, archaeologists discover small, frail skeletons, no taller than 4 feet, with unusually large craniums and delicate limbs. The bones are old, very old. But there's no sign of ritual burial, no grave goods, no weapons, just bones, and something else. Scattered along the walls and floors are a set of stone discs, round, roughly a foot across. Each one has a perfectly circular hole in the center, like a vinyl record. Grooves spiral outward in a tight, even swirl, not carved randomly, but patterned, etched with purpose. At first, they're labeled as ritual objects. Some say they're grinding stones. Others suggest they're simple markers or tribal currency. But then someone examines them under magnification and sees something astonishing. tiny carvings too small to be seen by the naked eye, glyphs, symbols, perhaps even writing, but not in any known language. Over time, more than 700 of these discs are allegedly discovered. The carvings suggest a narrative, a tale of beings who came from the sky, crash-landed in the mountains, and took refuge in the caves. Their ship damaged, their crew stranded. They sought contact with the local tribes, but were feared for their small size and strange appearance. They called themselves the Dropa. You blink, because this isn't archaeology anymore. It's beginning to sound like science fiction. And yet, there they are. Stone discs, glyphs, skulls with unusual proportions. Now, let's be cautious. Mainstream archaeology considers the Dropa stones a hoax, a legend fueled by unreliable sources and a lack of verifiable evidence. The original reports were never properly published in peer-reviewed journals, and the so-called translations of the glyphs. They came from non-academic channels with no way to confirm the story. But that hasn't stopped the tale from growing. Over the decades, photos of the stones surfaced blurry, grainy images of round discs held in gloved hands. Some researchers claim to have held them, measured them, even tested their composition. In one such claim, a stone was found to contain high concentrations of cobalt, a metal often associated with modern electronics and magnetic storage. And then there are the claims, unverified but persistent, that the stones emit electromagnetic pulses when exposed to certain frequencies. Nothing powerful, just a hum, a murmur, like static from a distant signal. Historians still argue whether the Dropa stones even exist. The Chinese government has long since sealed the caves, requests to visit have been denied, and many of the stones themselves have supposedly disappeared, lost in the shuffle of museums, private collectors, or bureaucratic vaults. But there's something haunting about the story. Maybe it's the way the glyphs spiral outward, like a message not meant to be read all at once, but slowly, gradually, as if decoding a frequency from beyond time. Maybe it's the setting high in the Himalayas, a place already shrouded in myth, where legends of sky gods and mountain spirits go back thousands of years. Or maybe it's the bones, because even if you remove the alien hypothesis, you're still left with tiny skeletons of unknown origin buried deep in caves designed by hands that left no record. The skulls, the discs, the glyphs, they form a triad of mystery that feels too deliberate to dismiss as a fabrication. And then there's this. The local people, the Hamas tribe, sometimes confused with the more well-known Tibetan groups, have stories passed down through generations. Stories of small star-traveling people who came from the sky and lived in the caves. Not gods, not monsters, just others, visitors, not conquerors, not angels, just stranded beings trying to survive. And isn't that the most human story of all? So, maybe the Dropa stones aren't about ancient aliens or crashed saucers. Maybe they're about contact, a different kind of intelligence, one remembered only in the quiet folds of mountain myth. Maybe the stones were not left for science. Maybe they were left for memory. A kind of apology, a kind of confession, or perhaps just a record of a journey home that never happened. You stand now in the imagined stillness of that cave. Dust sifts from the ceiling. A breeze cuts through the narrow entrance. You kneel beside one of the discs, brush the dirt away, and feel the etchings beneath your fingertips. They're cold, smooth, spiraled like the grooves of a record waiting to play a song that no one remembers how to hear. And in that moment you realize, whether myth or hoax, relic or story, the Dropa stones remind you of something deeply true. That history doesn't always scream its secrets. Sometimes it whispers. The Dropa stones fade behind you, like the final echoes of a radio signal drifting off into static. You're left with more questions than answers as always, but also with a lingering feeling that somewhere out there in the cracks of what we call history, entire chapters have been torn away, scattered or locked behind vaults of silence. So, you go west. across deserts and timelines to a place where mystery doesn't lie in the sky or even in caves, but buried in stone in the heart of Texas. Yes, Texas. Tonight, you travel to the London Hammer. Not London, England, but London, Texas, a sleepy town with more cattle than conspiracy theories. And yet, in 1936, a discovery here stirred the kind of debate that still simmers nearly a century later. It begins with a walk. A couple, Max and Emma Hahn, were hiking near a waterfall when they noticed a strange wooden handle sticking out of a rock formation. Curious, they brought it home. Years later, their son cracked open the rock to find something that by all accounts should not exist. A hammer. A 6-inch iron head still attached to the wooden shaft, encased entirely in a block of stone. Let's break that down. This wasn't a rusty tool buried under a few inches of soil. It was completely fused within the rock itself, as if nature had swallowed it whole and then fossilized the moment like a secret. The rock formation, according to early claims, was part of the Cretaceous layer dated at more than 100 million years old. And yet, here was a clearly man-made object. Now, before we start drawing timelines with ancient blacksmiths walking among dinosaurs, let's explore what makes this artifact such a magnet for controversy. First, the metallurgy. The head of the hammer is composed of 96.6% iron with traces of chlorine and sulfur. That's surprisingly pure for pre-modern metallurgy. Some metallurgists who examined the artifact claimed it was anomalously advanced, with a composition that resists rust even after decades exposed to the elements. Others argue that the chlorine content is evidence of a primitive smelting technique long forgotten. Either way, it wasn't something a random chunk of iron ore could fake. Then there's the wood. The handle, although partially fossilized, still shows cellular structure visible under a microscope. It's organic and very old. How old exactly, hard to say, but certainly not from a factory in 1930. So what's going on here? Skeptics claim the surrounding rock isn't truly ancient, that it's a concretion, a kind of cemented sediment that can form in mere decades under the right conditions. They say the hammer simply got buried in a mineral-rich environment and over time became encased, giving the illusion of great age. But there's a problem. Independent geological analyses suggest the surrounding matrix shares properties with deep geological strata far older than any modern period. And if the hammer truly was embedded in rock formed millions of years ago, well then, someone must have dropped it there long before humans were even supposed to exist. Historians still argue about the implications. Is this a misplaced artifact from a lost civilization far older than Sumer or Egypt? Is it evidence of time travel, an object that fell through the cracks of dimensions? Or is it more mundanely a misunderstood modern tool trapped in a natural concretion? What's undeniable is that the hammer exists. It's on display at a small private museum in Texas, the Creation Evidence Museum, where it sits beneath a glass dome, silent, solid, and strangely serene. Not grand, not mystical, just out of place. And sometimes being out of place is more disturbing than being dramatic, because it invites you to question everything around it. If one hammer can rewrite timelines, what else lies beneath our feet, hidden in rock, wood, or ice? What stories have hardened into silence because no one knew how to listen to stone? You imagine it now. An ancient craftsman forging the hammer, his furnace a pit of coals, his hammerhead cooling in a bath of brine and wind. Or maybe not a man at all. Maybe something stranger. A visitor. A survivor of a prior age. Someone rebuilding after a cataclysm in a world already forgotten. Then the tool slips from his hand, falls, and lands where it should not be, covered by flood, silt, time, until it waits quiet, encased in stone, until the day a couple hiking near a waterfall in Texas picks up a rock that doesn't feel like a rock at all. That's the magic of anomalies. They don't need crowds or headlines. They sit in silence, patient, persistent, like footnotes that history forgot to redact. Whether the London hammer is 100 years old or 100 million, it leaves a mark not just on the ground, but in your mind. A gentle knock. Tap, tap. You hear it now, don't you? That low ringing sound of something ancient calling out. The hollow clang of the London hammer still reverberates faintly in your thoughts, like a bell tolling from deep within the earth's forgotten layers. But as you drift farther along this strange twilight journey, you begin to realize that the past doesn't only bury objects, it sometimes encases light itself. Not metaphorical light. Real, glowing, flickering light. And tonight, it leads you underground once again, this time into the enigmatic crypts and tombs of ancient Egypt, where deep within the stonework of temples lies a mystery that flickers like a filament. You've come to witness the curious enigma of the Dendera light. We're back in Dendera on the west bank of the Nile, specifically at the Temple of Hathor, a vast, beautifully preserved complex filled with carvings, columns, and ceilings adorned with stars. But tucked away in a chamber known as the crypt, normally off-limits to the public, you find something that doesn't quite fit the ancient narrative. It's a relief carving etched into the stone like so many others. But this one is different. It depicts what appears to be a group of figures surrounding an object that looks unmistakably like a large light bulb. Yes, a bulb, elongated, transparent-looking, with a snake-like filament curled inside. One figure holds the object aloft using a rod or socket-like base. Beneath it is what some interpret as a power source, perhaps a jed pillar believed to represent stability, but strangely similar in structure to a modern insulated power column. It's not just one carving, there are several. Each shows variations of the same device, a bulb-shaped object supported by human figures with what appears to be wires, energy sources, and occasionally even smaller people within the light itself, like some sacred energy personified. Mainstream Egyptologists offer a more conventional interpretation. They say what you're looking at is a lotus flower releasing a serpent symbolizing creation or the birth of life. The Jed pillar, just a symbol of Osiris. The entire scene in their view is a mythological tableau rich in symbolism but not technology. But here's the twist. Independent researchers and electrical engineers have looked at these carvings and seen something else entirely. They say the shape of the bulb is electrically plausible. The internal snake could easily represent a filament in a Crookes tube, a primitive vacuum tube that glows when exposed to electrical current. In fact, when recreated in laboratory conditions, a similar setup did glow when powered with static electricity from a primitive generator. This leads to an audacious question. Did the ancient Egyptians possess some rudimentary form of electrical lighting? Before you laugh, consider this. No soot marks have ever been found in the deep recesses of the pyramids or many of the tombs. These chambers are pitch black, without modern lighting, and yet the walls are covered in intricate, detailed carvings. How did they see what they were doing? Torches possible, but problematic. Open flames would have left soot trails on the ceilings and walls. Reflective mirrors, also possible, but experiments show they'd lose too much light to illuminate deep interiors effectively. Electric light, primitive, fragile, sacred, might explain a great deal. Historians still argue whether the Dendera light is evidence of ancient lighting or simply symbolic art. The lack of any physical bulbs, wires, or power sources leaves the theory floating in the realm of speculation. But then again, if such devices existed and were reserved only for ritual use or priestly chambers, how many would survive 2,000 years of looting, erosion, and war? And remember, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You picture it now. A high priest standing in the darkness of Hathor's temple. He holds the staff-like device over an altar. A low hum begins, then light. Not fire, not magic, but something clean, contained. The glow bathes the stone with soft illumination. Symbols shimmer. Gods seem to wake. It's not just sacred, it's controlled light. Predictable, repeatable. A miracle, or science. Even the Jed pillar, when viewed through a modern lens, takes on curious possibilities. With its stack-like design and resemblance to a Tesla coil's insulating rings, some researchers suggest it could represent a high-voltage insulator, a motif passed down through myth long after the device itself was lost. And it begs a deeper question. Why wouldn't a civilization as advanced and long-lived as Egypt have flirted with electricity? They built the pyramids with inch-perfect alignment. They measured the stars with eerie precision. They mummified the dead with chemical recipes we're only now beginning to decode. Isn't it at least possible they discovered some form of static or low-voltage electric manipulation? If so, it likely wasn't widespread. It was secret, sacred, hidden in the chambers of the elite. Perhaps even deliberately erased once its power was deemed too dangerous or no longer understood. Because if you believe in civilizational cycles where knowledge rises and falls, then it's not hard to imagine that somewhere in the long slope between peaks, someone lit a chamber using light that wasn't fire, and then lost the means to do it again. The Dendera light may be no more than stone and story. Or it may be the afterimage of forgotten brilliance etched into a temple wall, like a photograph scorched by a flashbulb too bright to last. You linger in the crypt a moment longer. The figures on the wall don't move, but they don't need to. Their message has already reached you. Whether it's symbolism or circuitry, the truth feels oddly close. You can almost hear the static, see the hum against the dark, feel the warmth of something electric flickering where only shadows should be. And you begin to wonder, what else have we mistaken for myth? What other gods were really engineers? What other temples were actually laboratories? You turn and step out into the night, and though the sky above is filled with stars, you find yourself craving something else entirely. Light, not from the heavens, but from the past. The faint afterglow of the Dendera light lingers in your mind, like a filament that refuses to fade, casting flickers of possibility over all you've been told about the past. You've descended into crypts, studied impossible gears, held sparks from ancient jars, and yet something deeper still tugs at your imagination. Not the light this time, but the shape of what we think we know. Tonight, you're going to follow that pull into the shadows of the Middle East to a site that quietly whispers of secrets far older than it should. This time, you're staring down the unsettling enigma of the Ubaid lizard men. It's not a location that draws tourists by the busload. The site is called Al-Ubaid, a humble tell near modern-day Ur in southern Iraq. It's one of the earliest known settlements in Mesopotamia, dating back to around 7,000 years ago, long before Babylon rose, before Gilgamesh strode across the epic, and before even writing was born. Most of what's been found there is expected pottery tools, fragments of huts and temples. But then came the figurines, dozens of them, made of terracotta, each standing no more than a few inches tall. Some are seated, some are standing. Many cradle infants. They're clearly humanoid in shape, arms, legs, torsos, shoulders. Some even wear what appear to be helmets or tight-fitting garments. But their faces, not human. Large almond-shaped eyes, reptilian snouts, scaled features, slits for noses, narrow, elongated heads, lizard-like beings frozen forever in baked clay. At first glance, you might assume they're stylized crocodiles or snakes, animals that figured prominently in Mesopotamian lore. But that assumption stumbles when you realize none of the Ubaid figurines are fully animal. They're always part human, with defined postures, accessories, and expressive gestures. One even holds a staff. Another cradles a baby lizard-headed child. And these weren't scattered flukes. They were found in layers across multiple excavation seasons, all consistent in style and posture. Not one or two curiosities, but a pattern. So what exactly were these figures meant to represent? Mainstream archaeologists suggest they were symbolic, perhaps deities, fertility idols, or tribal totems. Reptiles were common in the marshy lands around the Tigris and Euphrates. Perhaps the Ubaid people revered their strength, grace, or hunting prowess. But then again, no other culture in the region created such specific reptilian-human hybrids, and certainly not with this level of anatomical detail. That's where the alternative theories crawl in. Some researchers believe the Ubaid lizardmen are representations of an entirely separate species, one that may have coexisted with early humans or even ruled over them. In this view, the figurines weren't worshipped as gods, but remembered as rulers. Ancient ones, unfamiliar in form but very much present. Still others propose an even stranger idea, that these were extraterrestrial visitors, described in the only way the Ubaid people knew how, by modeling what they saw. A scaled, cold-eyed being, walking upright, speaking perhaps, or guiding. This theory ties into a broader pattern across early civilizations, the repeated emergence of serpent deities, dragon lore, and reptilian overlords. From Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica to the Naga of India, from Chinese dragon emperors to African serpent gods, reptiles slither across myth with uncanny consistency. Could it be coincidence? Historians still argue, often fiercely. The prevailing opinion is that these figurines were merely symbolic expressions, an artistic style, nothing more. The lack of written records from the Ubaid culture makes it difficult to pin down meaning. Without context, these figures are enigmatic but ultimately inscrutable. But context isn't always found in writing. Sometimes it's in patterns. And the pattern here is unnerving, because these figurines are far too specific, too detailed, too numerous to be dismissed as one artisan's fantasy. They show posture, ritual, and hierarchy. They interact with one another. One even appears to be wearing a sash, as if indicating rank or role. You picture a society now, long before Sumer, older than history, remembers where scaled beings walked among early humans. Not in myths or hallucinations, but as part of their world. Teachers, perhaps, or something less kind. What would they want? To guide, to rule, to blend in. Or maybe they didn't come from above or below. Maybe they were always here. Another branch of intelligence, one that thrived for a time, then vanished, leaving only these small clay echoes behind. That's the true haunting quality of the Ubaid lizardmen. They're too small to demand belief, too quiet to start a revolution. But they sit in glass cases now under museum lights with expressions that refuse to fade. Not fierce, not monstrous, just watchful. They look out through those wide, unblinking eyes, as if remembering something, or waiting for someone to recognize them. You reach the end of the exhibit. The labels all say figurines unknown purpose circa 5000 BCE. The explanations are tidy, polite, and deeply unsatisfying. Because you've seen too much. You've wandered through temples without soot, held gears from the ocean floor, and watched wooden birds glide on desert winds. And now, here in the land of reeds and ziggurats, you've met eyes with something older, something not quite human. And in that gaze you feel it, the cold, patient hum of a memory not quite yours. Something ancient, something scaled, something that just maybe still watches. The lizard-eyed sentinels of Ubaid fade behind you, like a bad dream you can't quite shake. Their clay forms, half human, half something else, leave a residue in the imagination. What were they watching for? What were they remembering? You don't have the answers, of course, but you're not ready to stop asking questions. Because tonight, your journey takes a turn towards something even stranger, an object so bizarre, so wholly out of place, that some refuse to believe it exists at all. It's called the Fuente Magna Bowl, and it was found nowhere near where it should have been. We go now to Bolivia, to the green rolling land near Lake Titicaca. The altitude is dizzying, over 12,000 feet above sea level. The wind tastes like ice and minerals. This is Inca country, once the heart of the Tiwanaku civilization. You expect to find Andean artifacts here, pottery idols, sun symbols, llamas. What you don't expect is Sumerian writing. And yet, that's exactly what the Fuente Magna bowl appears to offer. According to reports, the artifact was discovered in the 1950s near the town of Chua, not far from the lake's edge. A local farmer unearthed it while plowing his land, just a large ornate bowl made of stone and covered in decorative carvings. At first, it was stored away, considered nothing more than a curious find, maybe Incan, maybe Tiwanaku. But years later, when examined by archaeologists, it began to raise eyebrows, because inside the bowl, etched with careful precision, are cuneiform characters. Yes, cuneiform, the same script used in ancient Mesopotamia over 6,000 miles away. The wedge-shaped marks appear alongside another mysterious script, often compared to Proto-Sumerian or Proto-Elamite, both extremely early forms of written language from the cradle of civilization. It's been called America's Rosetta Stone, and it shouldn't exist. Here's the problem. The bowl appears to be authentic. It isn't a modern hoax. The wear, the aging, the style of engraving, none of it feels recent. And the bowl itself matches Andean stonework styles from pre-Incan civilizations. So two things are true at once. The bowl seems indigenous to South America. The writing on it seems native to ancient Sumer. So how? Historians still argue violently over this one. Skeptics claim the script has been misidentified, that it's a case of pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns where none exist. They argue that the carvings may resemble cuneiform by coincidence, or that well-intentioned but overzealous researchers misinterpreted decorative lines and symbols as structured language. Perhaps it's just pre-Columbian art stylized in a way that mimics but does not replicate Sumerian script. But others aren't so quick to dismiss, because the script has been analyzed independently. Several experts in ancient languages, including Dr. Clyde Winters, a controversial figure but experienced linguist, have translated parts of the bowl's inscriptions. His analysis suggests the writing is Proto-Sumerian and possibly related to early religious or ceremonial phrases. He claims the bowl makes reference to a goddess, perhaps Nia or Ninhursag, the Sumerian Earth Mother deity. Now imagine that, a ritual bowl honoring a Mesopotamian goddess buried beneath the soil of Bolivia. The mainstream response: rejection. Most archaeologists consider the Fuente Magna bowl an outlier, a fluke, or an outright fabrication, despite the lack of motive or profit. After all, the object wasn't found by an academic. It was dug up on a farm kept privately for years, and only brought to wider attention much later. Not exactly the makings of a publicity stunt. Still, museums won't touch it, universities won't discuss it, and it continues to sit largely ignored by the academic world. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't the only out-of-place artifact found near Lake Titicaca. Just a short distance from where the bowl was discovered lies the site of Tiwanaku, a vast ancient ruin that predates the Inca by over 1,000 years. And within those ruins are monoliths, temples, and a construction style that baffles even seasoned engineers. Stones weighing hundreds of tons were carved with almost mechanical precision and locked together without mortar. Some are etched with complex angular glyphs. Others contain mysterious cup marks that some researchers believe once held metal clamps, tools of an architectural style unknown elsewhere in the Americas, but very familiar to those who've studied Mesopotamia, Egypt, or even the Indus Valley. So what are we to make of this? Is the Fuente Magna bowl a lone anomaly, or is it a sliver of a story that's barely survived? Let's entertain for a moment the possibility that there was contact between ancient South America and Mesopotamia. It's an idea scholars have long dismissed as impossible. How, they ask, could cultures separated by oceans and continents have communicated, let alone exchanged knowledge? But the question assumes something: that ancient people were stationary, that they didn't sail, wander, explore. And yet everywhere we look, we find clues that they did. We have evidence of ancient shipbuilding thousands of years before Columbus. Phoenicians, Egyptians, and even the Polynesians undertook epic voyages that crossed vast distances. The Olmec heads of Mesoamerica depict faces that some believe resemble African or Asian features. Coconuts native to Southeast Asia have turned up in pre-Columbian South America. And let's not forget the Piri Reis map, which shows South America's coastline and Antarctica's long before it was discovered. What if we've underestimated them? What if Mesopotamian sailors driven by myth or desperation crossed the Atlantic before history could write it down? What if they brought their gods, their rituals, and their writing, and left behind the Fuente Magna bowl as a single fragile breadcrumb? It's a staggering thought. But you've walked alongside stranger truths already tonight. You imagine now an ancient boat cresting the waves, sails full of salt air. A priest cradles a carved bowl, careful not to drop it. The stars guide them, not maps. The sea welcomes and resists as it always does. When they land, they find high mountains, thin air, and a people who speak in cliques and sun signs. Do they trade? Do they teach? Or do they simply live quietly, unnoticed, their myths becoming absorbed into new ones? And when they die, the bowl is buried, forgotten, waiting for a farmer and a plow to bring it back into the light. Historians still argue. Most of them dismiss it entirely. Others quietly admit the object is unusual, unexplained, or inconvenient. But in the museum of your mind, it now sits under soft lights next to the Saqqara bird, the Baghdad battery, and the Dropa stones. Out of place, out of time, but not alone. Each one whispers a similar story. That our past was not simple, that our ancestors were not primitive, that perhaps the timeline of civilization isn't a neat line, but a spiral, one that winds back then forward, fades then returns, and maybe the bowl is not just an artifact. Maybe it's a message, etched in stone, in a language we were never supposed to find. The Fuente Magna bowl rests now in your memory, like a relic from a forgotten shipwreck, weathered out of place and heavier than it looks. Its spiraling mystery loops in your thoughts as you drift onward towards something even more elusive, a book no one can read, not because it's old, not because it's damaged, but because the language itself is unknown, as if written by a mind that didn't grow up here. Tonight, you find yourself inside a medieval fortress of silence and symbols. You're holding the Voynich manuscript. It is not a hoax. It's real. You can see it in Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, bound in aged leather, faint scent of vellum and old air. Its 240 pages are filled with vivid, colorful illustrations, flowers, plants, celestial diagrams, biological sketches, and naked women bathing in what appear to be alchemical pools. But the real enigma isn't the art, it's the text, line after line of tightly written looping script. Each character dances just slightly different from the last. There's rhythm syntax, even something resembling grammar. But no one, not linguists, not codebreakers, not AI, has been able to translate a single word. Let that sink in. The manuscript was carbon dated to the early 15th century, around 1404 to 1438 CE. That's before Columbus set sail, before Gutenberg printed his first Bible. And yet, its language and script are completely unlike anything else in the historical record. No known alphabet, no match in any medieval language. It defies categorization. Historians still argue whether the Voynich manuscript is a ciphered document, a constructed language, a conlang, an elaborate hoax, or a sincere record from a now lost culture or sect. Some have theorized it's a mnemonic device meant to help one person remember oral teachings. Others believe it's a pharmaceutical treatise, its pages brimming with herbal diagrams and astrological cycles. The bathing women, they suggest, represent bodily systems or therapeutic rituals. But none of that explains the writing. Researchers have run every statistical analysis imaginable. And here's where it gets weird. The text obeys linguistic rules. Word frequency distribution and entropy levels match those of real languages. It behaves like a natural human tongue, but it's not one we've ever encountered. You flip through the pages. There are botanical drawings of plants that don't exist, or perhaps ones that did once. There are strange celestial wheels complete with star clusters and moon phases. Some have labeled this the astronomical section, others call it zodiacal, though none of the signs match traditional constellations. The most unsettling part, the bathing women. Tiny pale figures naked, submerged in green-blue pools connected by pipe-like structures. Some flow into organs, others into flower-like fountains. It resembles some kind of early biomedical diagram, as if someone were trying to map the body, the stars, and the spirit as one continuous system. You stare at it, and it stares back. Who made this? One theory suggests it was authored by Roger Bacon, a 13th century English philosopher known for his interest in alchemy and science. But the dates don't quite line up. Others believe it came from the Cathars, or some hidden Gnostic sect. Still others claim it's the work of a lone genius, someone who invented their own script, their own symbols, their own world. Then there are the more fringe theories. Some say it was dictated in trance, channeled like automatic writing from another plane of existence. Others suggest it's an artifact left behind by non-human intelligence, possibly from a pre-flood civilization, or even an off-world origin. That may sound far-fetched until you realize we can't prove it wasn't. Because for all our satellites, our sensors, our supercomputers, this book remains unread. Not unreadable, unread, a challenge still unclaimed. In 2018, artificial intelligence was trained to decipher ancient languages, and while it made progress with Phoenician Ugaritic and early Hebrew, it failed completely with Voynich. The script resists translation, like a stone resists the wind. Unmoving, stubborn, patient. And that might be the point. Maybe the Voynich manuscript isn't meant to be read. Maybe it's meant to be remembered, like a dream journal written not for communication, but preservation. A record of a way of seeing the world that no longer exists. Herbal medicine, star wisdom, bodily cycles all fused together in a language now lost to time. Or perhaps to memory. You pause on a page near the center. A cluster of women gather in a pool surrounded by vines and tubes. One reaches out not toward the water, but toward you. Her eyes are ink dots. Her hand is no larger than a fingernail, but she looks aware. You wonder if you're not just observing history, but being observed in return, because something about this manuscript feels alive, like it remembers being held, like it's waiting not to be solved, but to be understood. And perhaps that's the real challenge, not to decipher its grammar, but to see the world as it once was, a place where medicine was magic, stars had voices, and bathing was a sacred act of alignment with the universe. A world where knowledge wasn't broken into pieces, but flowed fluid, circular, and luminous. So you close the manuscript gently, not because you're done, but because it is. For now. The Voynich manuscript doesn't need to be solved to be powerful. It needs to be respected. As a doorway, as a puzzle, as a relic of a forgotten intelligence that once tried very hard to leave something behind. Something not to be shouted but whispered. Like all the best secrets are, the Voynich manuscript may be unread, but its silence speaks volumes. As you drift onward, you carry with you the weight of its pages etched in a language both utterly alien and yet hauntingly familiar. But tonight's journey is not done, because now you'll descend into a new mystery, one that doesn't merely resist translation, but seems almost too deliberately encrypted. This is the tale of the Rohank Codex. Imagine a book, brown leather-bound, fragile and yellowed with over 400 pages of tight vertical script and strange angular illustrations. It's a book that no one knows how to read. A book that has resisted decoding for centuries. A book that many believe is a hoax, while others insist it holds the key to a forgotten civilization. Welcome to the Rohank Codex, a manuscript found not in some distant desert or jungle, but in Hungary. It first emerged publicly in the 1830s when it was donated to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences by a nobleman named Gustav Batthyány. He claimed to have inherited it from his family's private library in Rohank, now Recknitz, Austria. No one knows where it came from before that. No records, no references, and then people began to read it or try to. The codex is written in an entirely unknown script consisting of over 200 unique characters. Unlike the looping, almost organic forms of the Voynich manuscript, the Rohank script is geometric blocky and often tightly compressed. It flows vertically, not left to right, or right to left, another oddity. More curious still are the illustrations, crude but unmistakable. Knights bearing crosses, fortresses under siege, people in robes bowing before celestial shapes, symbols that look vaguely Christian but not quite. Some images suggest Islamic pagan or even Zoroastrian influences. It's as if someone took pieces from half a dozen belief systems and remixed them into a new visual language. What is this thing? Historians still argue whether the Rohank Codex is a long-lost liturgical text from a heretical sect, an elaborate linguistic experiment, a coded military chronicle, or simply a masterful 19th century hoax. But here's what we do know. Several people have tried to decode it. One of the earliest was Ferenc Toldi, a respected literary historian who dismissed it outright as a forgery. Later in the early 20th century, Gyula Sebastian attempted a linguistic breakdown. He claimed it was written in an early form of Hungarian, but his translation yielded little more than poetic nonsense. Then came Dr. Attila Nyíri, a physicist and amateur linguist. He believed the text used a cipher alphabet hiding Roman Catholic prayers. His translation revealed variations on the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and other familiar passages. Yet his methodology was murky, and no one has been able to reproduce his results consistently. Then, in the 2000s, a fresh wave of cryptographers armed with AI algorithms, frequency analysis, and comparative linguistics took a swing at the manuscript. Still no breakthrough. Why? Because the script doesn't behave like a known language. Word repetition, sentence structures, and syntax don't align with anything in Indo-European Semitic or even constructed language families. Some pages appear to use only a handful of repeating glyphs, while others contain long, sprawling combinations with no pattern. It's almost as if the script evolves as it goes. That idea, while speculative, has led some to propose a radical theory that the Rohank Codex was created by more than one person, perhaps over generations with evolving conventions. Or worse, it was meant to be unreadable, constructed to hide its content beneath layers of code that only a select few were ever meant to decipher. And what might they have been hiding? Religious heresy, Gnostic rituals, an underground history of a suppressed faith, or nothing. There's a psychological trick at play here. Humans are pattern seekers. We stare at something obscure and instinctively try to solve it, impose meaning, unlock it. But the Rohank Codex may not want to be unlocked. It may in fact be the lock, a test, a distraction, or a relic of a forgotten literary art form, codified nonsense with purpose. But let's suspend our cynicism. Let's suppose for a moment that it's real, that someone hundreds of years ago decided to record a sacred or dangerous story in a script only they understood. They illustrated its key moments, wars, rituals, conversions, using a symbolic shorthand of their own. Maybe it was a heretic monk, a scholar priest with access to multiple traditions, trying to preserve his version of truth in a time of censorship and religious wars. You imagine him now seated in a cold stone scriptorium, dipping quill into ink. The candles flicker. He glances over his shoulder. Each stroke he writes isn't just a word, it's a shield protecting what he knows from eyes that would burn it. You wonder who was he hiding it from? The church? The crown time itself? It's easy to say forgery and move on. Harder to sit with the weight of mystery, especially when the object in question still exists, still confounds, still refuses to disappear. Today, the Rohank Codex remains housed in Budapest, under controlled conditions handled only by gloved hands. You can request high-resolution scans. You can stare at them page after page until the shapes begin to dance. But you can't read it. Not yet. And maybe not ever. But in a way, that's what gives it power. Because unlike so many lost things, the Rohank Codex isn't buried. It isn't burned. It's right there waiting, whispering. It doesn't scream to be understood. It merely endures. And in a world of instant answers, that endurance is a kind of magic. Not the kind that turns lead into gold, but the kind that turns ink into eternity. The Rohank Codex closes in your mind like a book that might reopen the moment you stop watching it. Unreadable, unsolved, but undeniably present. And as you move forward on this gentle starlit descent through forgotten knowledge, your next destination isn't a book, or a bowl, or a battery. It's a disc. A perfect palm-sized spiral of baked clay, etched with symbols no one can translate from a place and time no one fully understands. Tonight you hold the Phaistos disc. You're now standing in the ancient palace of Phaistos, on the island of Crete, in the heart of the Minoan civilization. It's warm here. Dry winds, faint scent of salt and thyme. The sea is never far. The ruins are worn and quiet, but beneath their stones lies the story of Europe's first great civilization, older than the Greeks, older than written myth. And tucked away among its artifacts is the strangest relic of all, a disc that refuses to speak. The Phaistos disc was discovered in 1908 by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier, buried in the basement of what may have been a temple or archive. It's a circle of baked clay about 6 inches across, stamped on both sides with a spiral of pictographic symbols. There are 241 symbols in total, arranged in a perfect spiral like a vinyl record made centuries before electricity. And it's unlike anything else from the region. These symbols aren't scratched or carved. They were stamped, each one pressed into the clay using small pre-formed tools. This makes the Phaistos disc not just a text, but arguably the earliest known example of movable type. Long before Gutenberg, long before paper, the Minoans may have invented printing. But what does it say? No one knows. The symbols include human figures, birds, fish, plants, tools, weapons, and geometric forms, many of which appear nowhere else in Minoan art. The script is not Linear A or Linear B, the two known writing systems of Bronze Age Crete. It is completely unique, an isolate both in language and in medium. Historians still argue whether the disc was a religious hymn, a calendar, a board game, a coded message, or a ceremonial object never meant to be read. Several attempts at translation have been made. Some researchers claim to see patterns, repeated sequences that may indicate names, titles, or invocations. Others believe it to be a syllabary, with each symbol representing a sound. A few even link it to ancient Anatolian or Luwian languages, but no interpretation has held up under scrutiny. And here's the mystery within the mystery. It's one of a kind. No other object with this script has ever been found. Not in Crete, not in Greece, not anywhere else in the ancient world. Imagine finding a single book in a language that appears nowhere else on Earth. That's the Phaistos disc, which raises the question, was it a prototype? An artifact of a short-lived printing experiment, or a relic from somewhere far beyond the Aegean, carried to Crete by trade or conquest? Some fringe researchers suggest the disc didn't originate on Crete at all. They propose connections to the Indus Valley, the Hittites, or even Atlantis. Not because of hard evidence, but because the object feels so untethered to its surroundings. It's as if someone passed through, left a message, and vanished, leaving behind this single clay record spinning forever in silence. You imagine the moment it was created. A scribe sits by a hearth, warm firelight glowing on stone walls. He selects small carved stamps, dozens of them, and presses them one by one into wet clay. A spiral takes shape. A message builds. Maybe he reads it aloud as he works. Maybe he chants. When it's done, the disc is baked, hardened, and placed inside a room where it remains for 3,500 years, waiting to be rediscovered. But what was he saying? Was it a prayer? A warning? A spell? The symbols are deceptively charming. Some resemble dancing women. Others look like helmets, arrows, or lilies. They feel almost modern in their simplicity. Like emoji from an ancient phone, no one knows how to unlock. In 2014, researcher Dr. Gareth Owens claimed that certain repeated phrases on the disc could be translated as a prayer to a Minoan mother goddess. He pointed to the recurrence of a symbol he believed meant lady or divine woman. According to his interpretation, the disc may have been a hymn perhaps recited during rituals of fertility or harvest. Others aren't convinced. The problem is, without more examples of the script, there's no way to test any theory. Every proposed translation is just that, a proposal, a hypothesis hanging in the void. So the Phaistos disc remains where it began, unread, unverified, but unforgettable. Because unlike the Rohank Codex or the Voynich manuscript, it's not long or dense or sprawling. It's compact, tidy. It knows exactly what it wants to say. It just hasn't found the right ears to hear it yet. You hold it now in your imagination, cool, smooth, comforting in its symmetry. It almost feels like a wheel or a medallion or a seal. You wonder if its very shape is part of its meaning, a cycle, a ritual, a return. Or maybe like so many mysteries from the deep past, it isn't meant to be solved with translation at all. Maybe it's meant to be felt, like a song with no lyrics, like a name you've forgotten, but still remember how to say. You turn the disc slowly in your mind. Side A, Side B. It's not a story, it's not a statement, it's a circle. And maybe that's the answer. Not everything begins and ends. Some things just turn, forever. The Phaistos disc still turns quietly in your thoughts, a whisper in ceramic, a language that loops rather than marches. And as you gently place it back on its mental pedestal, your journey leads you to something far more terrestrial, yet no less baffling. This time you're not in a library, a ruin, or a museum. You're in a graveyard, a cemetery in England to be precise. And set into an unassuming 18th century monument, a pastoral scene carved into stone is one of the world's most enduring coded inscriptions. Unsolved, unbroken, and deeply unsettling in its stubborn secrecy. Welcome to the mystery of the Shugborough inscription. It's the kind of thing you could walk right past without noticing. A quiet stone relief nestled on the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England. Commissioned around 1748, the monument is formally known as the Shepherd's Monument. It was built by Thomas Anson, a wealthy and well-traveled Englishman, and sculpted by the Flemish artist Peter Scheemakers. At first glance, it appears to be a bucolic scene. Two shepherds, a man and a woman, pointing toward a tomb, with a third, smaller figure standing behind them. The image is a reversed copy of Nicolas Poussin's painting Et in Arcadia Ego, which itself is laden with mystery and symbolism. The phrase, "Even in Arcadia there am I," is often interpreted as a memento mori, a reminder that death is present even in paradise. But it's what sits beneath the image that has driven cryptographers, historians, and treasure hunters to distraction for centuries. 8 capital letters carved into the stone, OUOSVAVV, framed above and below by the letters DM, a Roman abbreviation for Dis Manibus, to the shades of the dead. Historians still argue, what does OSVAV mean? No one knows, and no one has ever been able to prove a definitive solution. Some believe it's a Latin acronym standing for a hidden religious or philosophical phrase, perhaps a coded reference to resurrection enlightenment or a Gnostic belief system. Others think it may be ciphered initials referring to a secret lineage, a lost truth, or a buried relic. And then there are those who go deeper. Because this simple carving is not just an isolated curiosity, it's tangled in one of the most famous historical rabbit holes of all time, the legend of the Holy Grail. You see, Nicolas Poussin, the painter whose work inspired the monument, was rumored to have belonged to secret esoteric societies, and his works were studied obsessively by Rennes-le-Château researchers and Grail seekers for clues. The phrase "et in Arcadia ego" became symbolic of hidden knowledge of truth concealed in art, and Shugborough Hall, owned by the Anson family, known for their ties to exploration, Freemasonry, and Rosicrucianism. Thomas Anson's brother, Admiral George Anson, sailed around the world and returned with exotic artifacts, maps, and perhaps something more. It's all circumstantial, of course, but the inscription has defied solution by some of the best minds on Earth. In the 20th century, both Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens reportedly tried their hand at solving it. In the 21st century, British intelligence agency GCHQ even sent codebreakers to analyze the carving and failed to decipher it. Dozens of theories have emerged over the years. That it hides the location of the Holy Grail buried somewhere on the estate, that it encodes a Rosicrucian mantra or alchemical formula, that it's a poetic tribute to a lost love, its meaning known only to the Anson family. One theory suggests the letters stand for the Latin phrase Optime Uxoris, Optime Sororis Viduus, Amantissimus Vovit Virtutibus. The most devoted widower dedicates this to the best of wives and sisters to her virtues. It's elegant, romantic, but unprovable, and perhaps a little too tidy. Another proposes the phrase, out under one, sky virtue always vanquishes vice. A bit poetic, a bit forced, like trying to make puzzle pieces fit by reshaping them with your thumbs. And then, there are those who believe the letters are not to be read, but felt a mantra, a vibration, a symbolic alignment rather than a literal phrase. A spiritual key, not a linguistic one. Could it be that the true meaning is not in the letters at all, but in the act of interpretation? That the inscription is a kind of mirror reflecting back the assumptions, hopes, and obsessions of whoever gazes upon it? You imagine now the shepherds on the monument. They point to the tomb, yes, but they also look out directly at you. Their expressions are calm, maybe even knowing. The entire scene feels frozen mid-revelation, like they've just uncovered something but refuse to speak. And that's the energy of the Shugborough inscription. It's not a scream. It's a quiet riddle, a whisper carved in stone, repeating the same phrase to every visitor. I am here. I have always been here. Can you hear me? Maybe you can. Maybe you're not meant to break the code. Maybe you're meant to carry it, to keep the question alive, to remind others that mystery still exists even in an age of instant answers. You reach out in your imagination and trace your fingers over the carved letters. O-U-O-S-V-A-V-V. The stone is cold, but the silence hums. The Shugborough letters fade into stone behind you, 8 quiet characters etched into eternity, daring you to ask, but never offering reply. As you drift further into this twilight world of forbidden artifacts and unsolved truths, your fingers brush the next relic. It's not carved in stone, it's not bound in leather, it's not hidden in some deep crypt or locked away behind museum glass. It's carved into wood, but not by human hands. Welcome to the Rongorongo script of Easter Island. You find yourself on the wind-blasted slopes of Rapa Nui, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. Over 2,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass, the island rises like a sunken memory in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Known for its towering moai statues, Rapa Nui has always stirred questions. How did a seemingly small island society move multi-ton megaliths? Why did they build so many, then stop? But tonight, the mystery isn't about stone giants. It's about the writing they left behind, or at least, what appears to be writing. Because among the most enigmatic remnants of this ancient culture is a series of wooden tablets, each inscribed with looping rhythmic symbols. Dozens of them. Carved in horizontal rows, alternating direction from line to line in a style known as reverse baustrophodon. a method rarely seen outside a few ancient scripts. This is rongorongo, and it has never been decoded, not once. You run your fingers along the imaginary grooves. Each glyph is a tiny silhouette. People, animals, shapes all rendered in fluid, stylized outlines. They look like pictographs, but they recur in complex ways. They follow rules. They obey patterns. Like a language, like a system. But it's a system we can't access. Historians still argue whether rongorongo is a true writing system like an alphabet or syllabary, a proto-writing system like early hieroglyphs, a ritual mnemonic meant to trigger oral recitations, or something in between, a hybrid, a spiritual notation, a cosmic calendar. Whatever it is, it's not casual. It's etched with patience, intent, skill. But here's the tragedy of rongorongo. By the time European missionaries arrived in the 18th and 19th centuries, the culture that carved these symbols had already begun to collapse. Oral traditions were fading. Elders who might have explained the symbols were dying. And most devastating of all, missionaries considered the script pagan, so they burned it. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of rongorongo tablets were destroyed, used as firewood, or thrown away. Only about 24 survive today, scattered across museums in Europe and the Americas. Their meanings lost, their purpose forgotten. And yet, they still speak, because even if we don't understand what the glyphs say, they communicate structure. Linguists have found repeating sequences. Specific arrangements suggest genealogies, astronomical observations, or myth cycles. Some researchers believe the tablets were ritual objects carried or chanted during ceremonies like rosaries made of language. Others go further. They note that some rongorongo symbols appear to track lunar cycles, planting seasons, and even eclipses. Was this a kind of farmer's almanac, a cosmic calendar, a sacred record of the sky? We don't know, because no one left a Rosetta Stone. No one recorded translations. Even the island's current descendants, the Rapa Nui people, can no longer read them. The connection was severed, not gradually, but brutally. Colonization, disease, slavery, and cultural erasure did what the centuries could not. And yet, here they are. These tablets survived shipwrecks, fires, wars, neglect. They are survivors, quiet emissaries from a people who once looked at the stars and saw meaning. You close your eyes and imagine a time before collapse. A sacred hall, lit by fire. A priest holds a wooden tablet chanting. The symbols aren't just letters, they're anchors. Mnemonic tools for stories handed down for generations. A child listens eyes wide, learning not just words, but who they are. You imagine that child, now grown old, holding the same tablet. But now the language is slipping. Others have come, strange men with crosses and uniforms. They call the tablet evil. They set fire to it. The elder watches silent as the last written memories of a civilization turn to smoke. This isn't just a story of loss. It's a warning. Because rongorongo isn't a forgotten relic, it's a missing thread in the great weave of human language. It may be the only known script ever developed completely independently in Oceania. A writing system born in isolation, forged from oral tradition, bound to the land and the sky. And we let it vanish, but not completely, because some of it remains. Enough to haunt, enough to wonder, enough to ask. What if we could learn to read it again? What if the tablets aren't dead texts, but seeds waiting for the right mind, the right moment to bloom again? A few modern scholars haven't given up. Some work with computational linguistics. Others study the rhythm of chants passed down orally, hoping to find echoes of the symbols. A handful of Rapa Nui artists and cultural leaders have begun to revive the symbols, not as functional language, yet, but as art, as identity, as resistance. Because even unread, the glyphs are theirs. They belong to a people who remember what it means to carve stories into wood. To use language not just to record, but to invoke, to remember, to survive. And now you carry them too. You don't need to understand the glyphs to feel their weight. You don't need a translation to recognize a cry for remembrance. Rongo is not a puzzle to solve. It's a presence, a reminder that knowledge is fragile, that writing for all its permanence can still disappear. But as long as someone is willing to ask the question, what does this mean, then it hasn't truly been lost. It's just waiting for the right reader. Maybe that reader is you. The tablets of Rongo fade into the ocean mist behind you, each glyph a silent star in a forgotten constellation. The island breathes gently as you leave, whispering of stories once chanted beneath the full moon, now etched only in memory and wood. But your journey is not done. Not yet. Because now you descend into the sands, into a mystery sealed in silence, and mercury buried deep beneath a hill, guarded by clay soldiers and veiled in imperial majesty. You are entering the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. The year is 210 BCE. The air is thick with incense and fear. You are standing at the edge of a vast chamber lit only by torchlight. Behind you, the greatest empire in the East has just been unified for the first time. Before you, a vision of immortality unlike anything the world has ever seen. Qin Shi Huang, ambitious, ruthless visionary, wanted to rule not just China, but the afterlife. And so he commissioned one of the most extraordinary burial complexes in history. You already know part of it. You've seen the terracotta army, thousands of life-sized soldiers, archers, horses, and chariots, each one unique, each one frozen mid-march. They were discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well near Xi'an. That find changed history. But what lies beneath those soldiers is even stranger. Because the emperor's actual tomb, the burial chamber itself, has never been opened. Why? Because the ancient records are terrifying. The records of the grand historian, written nearly a century after Qin Shi Huang's death, describe a subterranean world that stretches the imagination. Rivers of flowing mercury meant to simulate the Yangtze and Yellow rivers, a ceiling studded with pearls to represent the night sky, traps and crossbows rigged to fire upon intruders, an entire underground map of the empire built to scale. And then there's the kicker. According to those same records, the tomb was sealed airtight, protected not just by traps, but by time poison and legend. To this day, the main chamber remains untouched. Why? Partly out of respect, partly out of fear, and partly because modern archaeology is still not ready. Scientists have confirmed the presence of extremely high mercury levels in the soil above the tomb, lending eerie credibility to the ancient texts. Any excavation could release toxic fumes, destroy fragile remains, or trigger collapses. So the tomb waits, unopened, undisturbed, whispering. Historians still argue whether the tomb should ever be breached. Some say it's a priceless time capsule, possibly containing scrolls, maps, lost inventions, even the true origins of the Chinese state. Others warn that opening it could destroy the very thing we hope to preserve. A single mistake, one breath of air, could rot millennia-old artifacts into dust. And still others believe it's cursed, not with magic or ghosts, but with something just as potent: hubris. The idea that we, in our modern certainty, can open a door built to remain shut forever and not suffer the consequences. But let's step back, because the true mystery isn't just what's inside the tomb, it's how it was built. This project began when Qin Shi Huang was just 13 years old. Over 700,000 workers, craftsmen, engineers, artists, slaves labored on it for nearly 40 years. Massive quantities of bronze, jade, and lacquer were used. The terracotta army alone represents an unprecedented level of sculptural detail and organizational scale, and yet so much of it was lost. Many of the artisans were reportedly buried alive after completion to protect the tomb's secrets. Some say this is why so little documentation remains. The workers vanished, the plans destroyed. The emperor's death marked not the end of his rule, but the beginning of his eternal sovereignty, sealed within a world of his own design. You picture it now, a chamber deeper than any cathedral. Walls painted with cosmological maps, the ceiling above glowing faintly with embedded pearls, and in the center, the stone coffin of Qin Shi Huang, silent sealed wrapped in myths. And mercury, lots and lots of mercury. Modern imaging has revealed promising hints, a large rectangular chamber beneath the central mound, surrounded by mysterious anomalies. But until we develop better technology, it remains a puzzle box we dare not open. And maybe that's for the best. Because there's a strange reverence in knowing it exists, untouched, unsolved. A monument to human ambition and to the belief that death is not an end, but a realm to be ruled. Qin Shi Huang wasn't trying to cheat death. He was trying to conquer it. In life, he built a nation. In death, he built an empire of silence. And so far, he has won. You walk slowly away from the tomb, the soil trembling with mercury beneath your feet. The terracotta soldiers flank your path like guardians. They do not move. They do not blink. But they are watching, always watching. And as you glance back one last time at the great mound rising behind you, you wonder, what secrets wait beneath? What stories lie sealed in lacquered coffins, etched in molten silver, written in ink that no longer exists? And what will we lose if we dare to look? Some doors are meant to open, others are meant to stand unmoved as a testament not to the dead, but to our inability to let go. And perhaps that's Qin Shi Huang's final triumph. He didn't just build a tomb, he built a question, one so big, so dangerous, and so heavy with consequence that we're still not sure if we want the answer. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang dissolves behind you, a sealed kingdom of mercury and myth shrouded in silence beneath the earth. Your breath slows. The weight of 2,000 years presses lightly on your shoulders. But tonight, you continue not upward toward the sky, nor forward in time, but deeper into the crypts of human curiosity. Now you stand before a body, not a king, not a conqueror, but someone far more mysterious. This is the screaming mummy, also known as Unknown Man E, and no one agrees on who he was. The story begins in 1886, when French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero was cataloging royal mummies stored in a hidden tomb at Deir el-Bahari near Luxor. This was the cache that held pharaohs Ramses II, Seti III, Thutmosis III, moved from their original tombs to protect them from ancient grave robbers. But among these kings and queens was something out of place. A corpse unwrapped raw face twisted in a silent scream, mouth wide open, eyelids drawn back, head flung backwards as if caught mid-howl. His body had not been embalmed properly. In fact, it had been deliberately desecrated. Wrapped in cheap sheepskin, considered ritually unclean, his hands and feet bound. No name, no markings, just a chilling expression frozen forever. Who was he? Historians still argue. Some call him the first cursed mummy, his agonized face a warning. Others suggest it's merely the result of natural decay, muscles tightening, post-mortem mouth gaping open in a final exhale. But those explanations don't sit well with many scholars, because the circumstances are just too strange. Let's review the facts. First, this man was buried among royals, not in a pauper's grave, not in a common tomb, but with pharaohs. That alone suggests importance. Second, he was treated like a criminal. His body denied the traditional embalming. His wrappings cheap and impure, his identity erased. And third, his body is remarkably well preserved despite the lack of mummification. That suggests he was buried quickly, possibly in haste or shame. So, we have an important man treated with disgrace, preserved by accident or urgency, buried among the greatest rulers of Egypt. His face, forever caught in anguish. The leading theory, Pentower, the son of Ramses III. The ancient judicial papyrus of Turin tells the tale of the harem conspiracy, an attempted coup to assassinate Ramses III. The plot, led by one of his wives, Ta, aimed to place her son Pentower on the throne, but the plan failed. Ramses III was likely mortally wounded, But he didn't die immediately. The conspirators were caught, tried, and sentenced. Pen Tower, being a royal, was forced to commit suicide. Some believe he hanged himself. Others suggest poison. Either way, his death was shameful. His status revoked, his name blotted out from all records. And that fits Unknown Man E perfectly. Royal lineage erased, name humiliating burial. And that scream, the final gasp of a betrayed prince. But it's not the only theory. Some believe the man may have been an invader, perhaps a Hittite diplomat caught in palace intrigue. Others say he was a disgraced priest, excommunicated and buried with both reverence and revulsion. A few have even speculated he was an early victim of ritual execution, sacrificed for reasons we no longer understand. And here's the twist. In 2012, a team of researchers conducted a genetic analysis of Unknown Man E. The results, a near-identical match to Ramses III, most likely his son. That's as close as science has ever come to solving the mystery. But even that isn't final. DNA degrades, interpretations shift, and the scream remains. You can see it now. Hollow eye sockets staring upward, lips stretched, jaw unhinged. The sound he made is long gone, but its shape is still there, etched in flesh, preserved by time. It doesn't feel like death. It feels like interruption, as if someone ripped him from the world mid-sentence and sealed him away in eternal protest. You wonder what he was trying to say. You wonder if he knew in that final moment that no one would ever know his story, that his name would be lost, his honor revoked, his tomb denied, but that his face, that scream, would outlast every scribe, every king, every record. And now it speaks to you, not in words, in silence. Because what's most chilling about the screaming mummy isn't the horror, it's the ambiguity. We don't know what caused that face, and we may never know, but the mystery makes him eternal. Other mummies are wrapped, sealed, covered in gold leaf and ceremony. Their eyes are closed, their mouths tight. They are at rest. But Unknown Man E, he's awake, watching, warning, waiting. Maybe he wants justice. Maybe he wants peace. Maybe he wants to be remembered. And tonight he is. You step away from the glass case of your imagination, where his body lies in a museum far from the place he was meant to rest. And as you do, the scream softens not into silence, but into something else. Not fear, not pain, but presence. Because long after the scrolls rot, the kings fall and the tombs collapse, he will still be there, not with a crown, but with a voice, the scream of Unknown Man. E lingers behind you, not as an echo, but as a feeling, something tight in your chest, something unresolved. A reminder that history doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it gasps. But your journey tonight carries on over wind-worn deserts, past crumbling palaces, down into another tomb. Only this time, the silence is not a scream, it's a hush. A reverent, awe-struck hush. Because what you're about to see isn't just a marvel of preservation, it's a miracle of mystery. You are now standing before the Lady of Dai. Also known as Xinjue, she is one of the best preserved mummies in the world. Not in Egypt, not in Peru, but in China 2,000 years ago during the Han Dynasty. And yet, her skin is still soft. Let that sink in. Her body, buried more than 2 millennia ago, still has intact veins, pliable joints, and even type A blood preserved in her vessels. Her organs are almost entirely whole. Her eyelashes remain. Her internal temperature was measured at the time of discovery. Her body is somehow biologically unreadable by time. So who was she? Xinjue was the wife of Li Chang, the Marquis of Dai, a nobleman in what is now Changsha, Hunan province. She lived around 160 BCE in an age of silk poetry and astronomical inquiry. And when she died, likely from heart disease at the age of 50, she was buried with a level of care and science that modern medicine still doesn't fully understand. Her tomb, uncovered in the 1970s at Mawangdui, consisted of 4 nested coffins, each lacquered and sealed. Her body was wrapped in 20 layers of silk and submerged in a mysterious, mildly acidic reddish liquid whose chemical composition still puzzles researchers. Surrounding her were over 1,000 artifacts, food cosmetics, musical instruments, embroidered garments, even a complete map of the heavens and the underworld. Every object was placed deliberately, part of a belief system where death was not an end, but a transition. But it's her body that draws the world's breath. Even her skin tone is visible, a faint, almost lifelike shade. Surgeons who examined her body reported that her limbs bent at the elbows and knees. Her hair remained styled. Her stomach still held melon seeds, suggesting she died shortly after a meal. Historians still argue how this was possible. The tomb was hermetically sealed, yes. The layers of charcoal and clay helped. The nested coffins created a kind of vacuum. But even taken together, these methods shouldn't have worked for 2,000 years. There's no known embalming fluid inside the body. No chemical preservatives were detected. Yet decomposition, normal, expected, inevitable decomposition, did not happen. Why? One theory suggests that the mysterious liquid she was submerged in somehow slowed cellular decay. Another posits that the unique microclimate within the tomb created a stable preservation bubble. Some researchers even speculate that unknown herbs or alchemical substances were used, formulas now lost to time. But none of the explanations are satisfying. The more we study her, the stranger it gets. The preservation is so precise, so comprehensive, that it challenges what we think we know about life and death. The line between ancient science and something more uncanny. And here's what makes the Lady of Dai so powerful. She wasn't a queen. She didn't conquer kingdoms. She didn't build pyramids or unify nations. She simply lived well and was loved enough to be buried with profound care. In a way, her tomb is a poem written in silk and wood and stillness. A love letter from her family, her culture, and her time. You imagine her now not as a mummy, but as a woman. A real person with real aches and laughter and thoughts. Maybe she enjoyed court music. Maybe she wandered gardens and read poems on moonlit evenings. Maybe she touched the silk robes laid beside her, not knowing they would be found again in 2,000 years. And yet here she is. Not dust, not bone, but remembered. You picture the archaeologists who first opened her tomb, how they must have gasped when they saw her still there, as if asleep. Imagine what it's like to unwrap silk from a face that looks back at you from another world. It isn't morbid, it's sacred, because what we found in that lacquered chamber wasn't just a preserved body. It was a dialogue across time, a message from a woman who had no idea we'd one day stare in awe at her hands, her veins, her closed eyes. It says we were not so different. It says you too will want to be remembered. It says even in death there is still beauty. Today, Lady Dai rests at the Hunan Provincial Museum, her body now entombed in a climate-controlled display case where she continues to puzzle, enchant, and inspire every visitor who draws near. And as you drift past her in your imagination, you leave not with fear, but with a kind of peace. Because for all the stories of screaming mummies, cursed tombs, lost languages, and cataclysms, this one reminds you of something softer. That love is memory. That care leaves traces. That death, when met with dignity, can become a kind of immortality. You take one last glance at her Lady of Silk, Lady of Stillness, and the silence around her isn't empty. It's full of lullabies, of incense, of quiet steps on lacquered floors. And maybe that's the lesson she offers tonight, that the most powerful mysteries aren't always the loudest. Some simply lie there, waiting, not to be solved, but to be seen. Lady Dai's chamber fades behind you, not with dread, but with reverence, like leaving a temple built from silence and silk. You feel it in your chest, not fear, not wonder, but something gentler, a stillness that lingers. But the path ahead beckons again, and now it carries you not into tombs or ruins, but into a high desert where bone-colored winds whisper over ancient alien shapes. Tonight, you arrive in Nazca, Peru, and as the plane glides overhead in your mind, you see them giant drawings carved into the earth. Not painted, not etched lightly in dust, but scraped into the desert floor some hundreds of feet long, preserved for centuries in one of the driest places on Earth. These are the Nazca lines, and no matter how many times you've seen them, they still don't make sense. There's a monkey with a coiled tail, a hummingbird with razor-thin wings, a spider with legs outstretched in perfect proportion. There are trees, whales, geometric grids, and arrows, each one drawn with eerie accuracy, all of them visible only from the sky. But the people who made them had no airplanes, no hot air balloons, no hills tall enough to observe the full images. And yet, these geoglyphs are perfectly aligned, stretching up to 200 feet long, laid out with a precision that would make a modern surveyor sweat. Historians still argue about why. Some suggest religious significance, giant offerings to sky gods, or deities of rain and harvest. Others propose they were part of massive ritual pathways walked by pilgrims in trance-like states to channel cosmic forces. There's also the water theory. Because the Nazca Desert is incredibly dry, averaging less than an inch of rainfall per year, some researchers believe the lines are vast irrigation maps or water symbolism used in ceremonies to call forth the rains. But then things get stranger, because among the animals and symbols are straight lines, dozens of them miles long, arrowing across the terrain with surgical clarity. Some align with solstices, others with mountain ranges, and some with no obvious feature at all. Were they calendars, messages, navigational tools? And then, of course, there's the ancient astronaut theory. Popularized by Erich von Däniken in the 1960s, this theory suggests the Nazca people created the lines as landing markers for extraterrestrials, or perhaps as messages visible only to beings flying above. The long runways, the clean geometry, the elevated visibility. Some say it's too perfect, too modern-looking to be ancient art. Skeptics roll their eyes. But the question remains, how did a pre-industrial culture create aerial art? Because here's the thing, the Nazca people didn't have metal tools, no wheels, no drones, and yet they managed to remove the reddish topsoil, exposing the white clay beneath, without disturbing the surrounding landscape. The lines have remained intact for over 1,500 years because the dry climate prevents erosion, and because the creators knew the land. They knew how deep to dig, how wide to score, how to align shapes across miles using basic tools and sheer intuition. And that may be the most astonishing fact of all, that humans without satellites or scripts could reach into the earth and sketch dreams for the sky. You drift lower now, feet brushing the desert floor. The lines are shallow, just a few inches deep, but their energy is immense. They stretch toward horizons as if chasing something, not wind, not sun, but meaning. Some of the shapes seem to breathe under moonlight. The spider. It's not just art, it has 7 legs on one side, 1 on the other, matching a rare Amazonian spider only seen by those who ventured far into the jungle. The monkey. It's not a local species, but it is one from the rainforest hundreds of miles away. How did they know? How did they carve what they couldn't see? In a scale they couldn't measure, using animals they couldn't have known so precisely. And what were they trying to say? You kneel beside one of the lines and feel the heat trapped in the desert floor. This land hasn't changed much in centuries. The same winds blow, the same dust drifts, but the messages beneath your feet remain sharp, purposeful watching. Some researchers believe the lines were walked like prayers, that the act of pacing their length was a kind of ritual, a way to connect with the divine. Others think they were created by shamanic visionaries, channeling symbols from beyond the waking world. And yet, even with all the theories, we still don't know. There's no script, no oral tradition explaining their purpose. The Nazca culture collapsed long ago, leaving behind no books, no explanations, just these silent lines in the sand. They don't form a sentence, they don't lead anywhere, but they endure. And maybe that's the point. Maybe not every mystery is meant to be solved. Maybe some are meant to slow us down, to remind us that we once looked at the stars and responded not with fear, but with creativity. Because whatever their purpose, the Nazca lines are an act of hope, of faith, a declaration to the sky. We were here, we saw you, we listened, and now you listen too. The desert is quiet, but it pulses with meaning. You imagine a line drawer, barefoot eyes squinting in the sun, pulling a cord taut and scraping a vision into the ground. Not for fame, not for survival, but for wonder. That's what stays with you as you rise again, brushing dust from your thoughts. The lines don't speak in language, they speak in intent, in artistry, in that most human urge to be understood by something greater, even if that something never answers. You take one last look down. The hummingbird glimmers beneath the dawn. The monkey curls in a quiet dance. And somewhere just beyond the hills, a new shape waits to be seen, not by gods or aliens or archaeologists, but by you. Because in the end, the Nazca lines don't just mark the earth. They mark us. Our curiosity, our courage, our refusal to stop drawing lines into the unknown. The lines of Nazca fade from beneath your feet, not erased, but absorbed into your memory, into your quiet awe, into that vast map of human yearning etched across the night. But as the desert sun sets behind you, casting long shadows over the geoglyphs, your path turns once more, this time towards something far older, far colder, and far more unsettling. Welcome to the Tarim Basin, a wind-swept stretch of earth in what is now western China, in the heart of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most arid and desolate places on earth. Locals call it the place of no return, and yet beneath these sands, something remarkable has been preserved for over 4,000 years. Mummies, but not Egyptian ones, not wrapped in linen, not laid in pyramids. These are the Tarim mummies, a collection of men, women, and children so well preserved that some look like they simply fell asleep, buried not in ceremony, but in silence. And here's what makes them strange: they don't look Chinese. In fact, many of them have European features: tall frames, long noses, high cheekbones, blonde or red hair, even blue eyes. Discovered in the 1980s and 1990s, these bodies were buried between 1800 BCE and 200 CE, long before the Silk Road would connect east and west. And yet their very existence challenges what we thought we knew about early human migration. Take, for example, the beauty of Lulan. She lies in a shallow wooden coffin, her face still peaceful, framed by auburn hair. Estimated to have died around 1800 BCE, she was in her 40s, likely a member of a semi-nomadic group that migrated across Central Asia. Her clothing wool garments woven with care, her boots still intact. Even the feathers placed beside her head are still recognizable. No wrappings, no gold, just practicality and grace. Then there's the Cherchan man, buried alongside his wife and infant son. He wears a red woolen robe and high leather boots. His face is framed by reddish-brown hair, his beard neatly trimmed. He looks more Celtic than Asian, and yet he was laid to rest thousands of miles from the lands typically associated with Indo-European peoples. How did they get here? Historians still argue. The prevailing theory is that these individuals were part of Proto-Tocharian cultures, early Indo-European speakers, who migrated eastward through the Eurasian steppe. Their language, discovered in ancient manuscripts, shares traits with Celtic and Germanic tongues. Their burial style, their textiles, their physical features all support the idea of an unexpected eastward movement of peoples long before recorded history caught up. But it gets stranger. Some of the burial sites suggest complex rituals, carefully aligned coffins, upright posts resembling sculpted trees, animal sacrifices, and grave goods meant to guide the soul. The materials found with the mummies, woven baskets, cheese, medicinal herbs, suggest a surprisingly advanced understanding of preservation, health, and agriculture. And then there's the environment. The arid, salty soil of the Tarim Basin, combined with shallow graves and dry desert winds, acted as a natural mummification system. No chemicals, no bandages, just time, sand, and silence. Yet despite the science, the Tarim mummies have stirred more than academic curiosity. They've stirred politics, because these mummies don't just represent an archaeological mystery, they challenge narratives of national history. Who was here first? Who belonged? What cultures passed through this land before borders and empires? For decades, Chinese authorities restricted access to the mummies, concerned that their origins might fuel separatist claims among the local Uyghur population or embolden foreign interest in a politically sensitive region. And in a way, the mummies themselves became buried again, not in sand, but in controversy. But no matter the barriers, they persist, not as political tools, but as people. You imagine the beauty of Lulan again, walking along the edges of a salt lake, wind in her face, a woven shawl over her shoulders. She wasn't trying to be part of a debate. She wasn't writing history books. She was living, breathing, laughing, perhaps singing in a language no one speaks anymore. And yet here she is, still here, still seen. Her presence and that of dozens like her reminds us that the human story is not neat. It's not linear. It's a braided river winding, doubling back, branching into 1,000 possibilities. And that's what makes the Tarim mummies so powerful. They ask questions that don't have easy answers. Who traveled this far and why? What songs did they sing? What dreams did they bury beneath these dunes? And perhaps most hauntingly, how many other stories have been lost beneath shifting sand? Because the Tarim Basin is vast, much of it remains unexplored. Ground-penetrating radar suggests the presence of more graves, more bodies, more forgotten cultures, waiting just a few feet below the surface. And each one may hold another thread to unravel our tidy timelines. It's humbling. You realize how little we truly know. You realize that the map we learned in school was a guess, a sketch drawn with incomplete ink. The real map, it's made of wool robes and forgotten faces, of buried languages and unexpected migrations, of people like you and not like you, walking beneath the same stars. 4,000 years ago. You close your eyes now. The desert wind howls outside your thoughts, but down in the tomb, it's quiet. The mummies rest, not in horror or spectacle, but in dignity, wrapped in time, touched by sunlight that hasn't changed in millennia. And in this stillness, you hear the final message. We have always traveled. We have always mingled. We have always been more connected than we thought. The Tarim mummies are not anomalies. They are reminders that every culture, no matter how remote or strange, began with footsteps, with cloth, with hands, with hopes, and sometimes with a burial deep in the desert, where the wind would forget them. But we would find them again. And listen, the desert wind of the Tarim Basin still hums in your ears as you step quietly out of that ancient sand-swept tomb. The faces of those mummies, those travelers, those mysteries linger behind your eyes. But this is not the end of your journey tonight. You have one last stop to make. It begins with a sound, a deep mechanical groan almost imperceptible, like rock grinding against rock. You're not in a desert now. You're standing in a narrow canyon where the silence feels alive. Stones shift in the moonlight. You glance down. They're moving. Welcome to the Sailing Stones of Death Valley, California. You've heard of them maybe even seen a photograph, a single lonely boulder trailing a long furrow through the dust, like it simply decided one day to get up and move. But this isn't a trick of the eye. These stones really move. Across the dry lakebed of Racetrack Playa, some weighing hundreds of pounds, these stones leave tracks behind them, straight lines, gentle curves, sometimes looping or intersecting, as if participating in a dance too slow for the human eye to witness. For decades, no one knew how. No footprints, no signs of tampering, no tire marks, and no obvious slope that could explain the motion. Just rocks that sailed. The phenomenon was first observed in the early 1900s, and since then it's baffled everyone from geologists to hikers to conspiracy theorists. Some blamed extreme windstorms, others proposed magnetic fields, and some naturally pointed to aliens. Because why not? But what made the mystery truly maddening was this: no one had ever seen the stones move. The tracks appeared suddenly. One day, the rocks were in one place, the next several feet away. No witnesses, no videos, just movement. Historians and scientists still argued into the 21st century. Some dismissed the phenomenon altogether, blaming it on hoaxes or clever trickery. But the stones kept moving, and they kept leaving trails in the mud to prove it. And then, in 2014, we finally caught them in the act. A team of researchers, led by Richard Norris and his cousin James, installed time-lapse cameras and GPS devices on select stones. And then, they waited, and waited, until one winter morning, the miracle unfolded. It wasn't wind, it wasn't magnets, it was ice. The perfect storm of conditions had arrived. A rare layer of overnight rain had created a thin sheet of water over the playa. Overnight, the shallow water froze into a thin pane of ice. As the morning sun rose, the ice began to crack and melt into floating panels that were large enough to push the rocks gently forward, aided by just a whisper of wind. That's all it took. Wind plus melting ice, plus ultra-flat clay, sailing stones. It wasn't magic, it was science. But the wonder that stayed, because this wasn't some easy solution. The event was still incredibly rare. It required perfect timing, exact temperatures, precise moisture, and just the right geography. It could only happen at Racetrack Playa, or places nearly identical to it. And even with modern surveillance, we only managed to record it once. So yes, we understand it now. But that doesn't make it any less beautiful. And it doesn't erase the century of mystery, the way people would walk onto the playa, find a line carved into the earth, and follow it like a story written in stone. You crouch beside one now. Your hand traces the faint furrow in the dry clay. It feels deliberate, intentional. But you know there's no consciousness behind it, no message, no ancient spirit pushing the rock across the plain. Or is there? Because something about the sailing stones feels more alive than dead. They move slowly, yes, but they move. Not metaphorically, not figuratively. They change, they act, and in that they remind us that the earth is not a backdrop, it's a character. It breathes, it bends, it writes its own stories. And these stories aren't always monumental or terrifying or divine. Sometimes they're quiet, subtle. They take years to unfold, but they're still profound. That's what the sailing stones offer: a meditation on patience. They don't rush, they don't announce, they just move, little by little, season by season. And isn't that what history really is? Not a collection of dates and empires, but a slow movement of stone, of pressure and time, of forgotten names etched into trails that vanish with the next rain. As you rise and walk across the playa, the tracks crisscross around you like the grooves of a massive vinyl record. You imagine pressing an ear to the ground, listening for the music, and you hear it, not a melody, not a rhythm, but a pulse, faint, steady, timeless. It says, even the stillest things can move, even the hardest things can change, and even rocks remember the way. You pause for one final look at the landscape. The sun is low now. Shadows stretch like stories. A stone rests silently near your foot, unaware of its mystery, unbothered by your wonder. And yet, it stirs something in you. Because this wasn't just a rock, it was a question. And like all the questions you've explored tonight, from the buried cities of myth to the silent screams of the dead, it doesn't demand an answer. It just wants to be felt. So you close your eyes, you let the wind move through you, and for just a moment you become still enough to understand This planet doesn't keep its secrets. It simply waits, and those who listen long enough quietly, patiently will hear them whisper, not in thunder, not in fire, but in stone. And now the stones are silent. You've traveled far tonight, across deserts and oceans, beneath pyramids, and into the bones of forgotten kings. You've stood beside machines older than memory, walked among lost languages, stared into the eyes of mummies who never meant to be remembered. You've felt the hush of forbidden knowledge, the chill of unexplained precision, the breathless pause before the ancient and the impossible. But it's time to come back now. Not quickly, not suddenly, slowly. Let the dust settle in your mind. Let the echoes of buried temples and wind-swept ruins soften into silence. You are safe. You are warm. The strange shapes of stone and time can rest now, like old friends tucking themselves into the corners of a dream. Breathe in. You've earned this quiet, because what you've explored tonight wasn't just mystery. It was wonder. A reminder that the world is deeper than headlines, older than textbooks, stranger than fiction, and still somehow achingly beautiful. These ruins, these questions, these ancient signs, they're not there to frighten you. They're there to whisper, there is still more to know. And you are part of that knowing. You carry the torch now, a soft one, a gentle flame that lights not the halls of science or religion or certainty, but the long, winding corridor of curiosity. So go ahead, sink deeper into your pillow. Let your eyes drift. The journey doesn't end when you sleep. It continues in dreams of stars over monoliths of maps, written in forgotten alphabets of footsteps where no one should have walked. Sleep well, explorer. The past is watching, and it smiles.